All right, Jim, we're live, baby. He's looking very serious over there. Well, everyone, welcome to episode 77. Today, I am joined by retired Major. We're going with Jim or James?
Yeah, we'll
be
Jim.
Official first. I'm James McCune, and we it's kind of hard because we'll get into your past, but I chose the Army flag behind you because that's who you retired with. But we'll get into it more. So before we get going, I'll just read a short bio for Jim. Today's guest is Major James McCune, U.S. Army retired, a leader forged through decades of service, sacrifice, and resilience. Born and raised outside of Pittsburgh, he enlisted in the Marine Corps at just 17 years old and shipped out to boot camp 4 days after high school graduation. That moment launched a remarkable 27-year military career spanning both the Marine Corps and the U.S. Army. He served around the world from Naples during the 1988 USO bombing to Sevastopol during the Cold War, I probably pronounced that wrong, and through combat deployments in Liberia, Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He was wounded in IED in Iraq, medevaced out of theater, and it returned to lead again later on. He served as a drill instructor. Can't wait to talk about that. Paris Island, platoon leader, company commander, and recruiter, shaping the next generation of warriors. James' dedication to earn him the Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Meritorious Service Medal, and Combat Infantryman's Badge, among others. And while his battlefield leadership is well documented, his pursuit of personal growth is just as impressive, earning multiple degrees, including a master's in management, a graduate certificate in organizational leadership, and a bachelor's in anthropology. We got to talk about why you picked that. So since retiring in 2014, he's continued to serve in protective service, security roles, and federal training while building a life rooted in purpose with his wife, Christina, whom he met at his first duty station in Naples. Together, they've raised 2 sons and now enjoy life on their small homestead, which you've talked a lot about while we were getting going. Surrounded by animals, music, special animals too, I found out, and peace, well earned. His story is one of courage, reinvention, and deep resilience, both on and off the battlefield. I'm honored to welcome Major Jim McCune.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for filling on short notice. It was
certainly.
I think Sean. You're hope we can talk about him a little more. He's been very pivotal to Boards with Patriot in the past month. Getting 2 people on, I can't get him to figure out when he's going to be on. I have to wait till his son's football schedule comes out. So
yeah, I was going to ask you when he was coming on.
I think it's November 14th or something like that. Maybe.
Okay.
Don't quote me on it. But let's start off with the quote as we always do. This is from pretty famous general. Most of us know General Douglas MacArthur, and it'll tie into something that was very pivotal for you as a officer as well as your personal experience. So, duty, honor, country. To have this award with my name inscribed on the back of it means that I am willing to give the utmost for my country, and I almost gave the utmost for my country. So it's talking about the Purple Heart, when we'll talk about that later on when you were wounded in Iraq. So like always, we like to start off from the very beginning.
All
Young
right.
Jim, outside Pittsburgh, what was that like?
It was good. I grew up south of Pittsburgh, so kind of rural area. Friends and I spent a lot of time outdoors, whether hunting or working on the farm that was down the street, or just walking around in the woods, pre-computer, pre-video game, pre-cell phone. So we were, just would go out in the woods and pick up sticks and beat each other with them, on occasion. But it was one of those places, great upbringing, but I couldn't wait to get out of there and, go see the world. So the military, as you mentioned, I enlisted between my junior and senior year. So, and even before that, I think right after I turned 16, I took the ASVAB. And ironically enough for the Army, although a year later, I ended up enlisting in the Marine Corps, and then ended up back in the Army, of course. But I
just took a little time to get it right.
Yeah. That's what some people say. So yeah, I wanted to go. I remember the smile on my recruiter's face because, he was like, oh, well, because of whatever, you get a choice of duty station. He's like, the closest base to your home, it would be, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And I was like, well, can I go overseas? And he's, oh, you want to go overseas? Yeah, I want to go overseas. And I think at the time they were offering 4 and 6 year enlistments. And he told me, okay, well, 4-year enlistment. And I was like, well, is that all I can do? So he had a big smile on his face, and I enlisted for 6 years, the first go round. And then even though I'd qualified for different jobs, I said, no, I want to be infantry. If I'm going to go in to the military, whether it's the Marine Corps or the Army, I want to be in the infantry. So yeah, he didn't have to do a whole lot of work to convince me of anything. And then
So before you left, so like, for a lot of people listening, like to me, it's not unusual because I feel like if I look back in my life, I feel like pretty early, I was drawn towards the military.
Mm-hmm.
But at 16, like what other influence did you have? Anybody in your family in the military? Any other like?
No direct relatives. Yeah. I had an uncle that was in the Navy in the 60s, a great uncle that was in the Army in the 50s. Grandfather was in the early Army or the Army Air Corps during World War II. I didn't find out until much, much later, but I've had relatives in the military since the French and Indian War and the Revolution, but I didn't know that at the time. So no real direct military influence. I just somehow stumbled upon it and it caught my attention, and I said, "Hey, I think that's what I want to do."
Yeah, because it's interesting to see that, because I mean a lot of us had that influence of somebody in the military, but like you said, you want to get out. Was that like you saw the military as like the quickest, best way to get out? What was your thinking back then?
I think so, and the sense of adventure. I mean, it was limited in what people really knew about the military back in the 80s. I mean, other than Rambo and things like that. So I knew I wasn't probably going to be doing anything like that, but it just I thought, well, I grew up hunting and shooting guns, and I thought, okay, well, if I go into the military, I can do that. And I know they have military bases all over the world, so I can travel and see the world. So it just seemed like the no-brainer at the time. And I know, again, a lot of people, if they do enlist out of high school, they wait until the end of the summer. And I was like, no, 4 days after graduation, I was out the door. And then, after doing the training, basic training, infantry school, then the new Marine Security Forces school. And then just as planned, almost, I got stationed overseas. So young 18-year-old. I think I turned 19 the day before I got to Italy. So brand new 19-year-old, never really been away from home. And there I was in Naples, Italy. So.
Not a bad place to be, I think.
No.
Let's go back a little bit though. So like you said, you didn't have anybody like direct in the military, come from a small town. Like what was mom and dad, families, what was their reaction to, hey, I'm, enlisting, I know what I'm doing in a year from now. And then, I'm out of here in 4 days. What did mom and dad family think about that?
I know when I was 17, my mom had to sign for me to enlist. So she, at the time, I don't remember her, doing any kind of pushback. But years later, she brought it up a few times, only when things were bad or I was deployed for a year or whatever somewhere, then she'd be like, I had to sign for you. But at the time, I don't think it wasn't a big family conversation, not a whole lot of questions. I think they knew me well enough to know where my head was and the kind of things that I was looking to do. So yeah, no issues. Didn't have to do a whole lot of convincing, and mom signed and off I went.
Yeah, I think that's interesting you brought up because, you're a little bit older than I am, but that same time frame, like you hit something that's interesting because like you didn't know about the military. Like it wasn't like today where you can like Google, like you can like Google 0311, you can Google all this stuff. And there's like 20, there's so many videos. There's so many things, like you can Google any like military pipeline that's out there. Right.
Right.
So for the person that's going into it, there's all this information. So there was a lot of this like mystery and like what's it like? And you wouldn't really know unless you knew someone, right?
Right.
And then the other thing, it had to be good for the parents a little bit too, because they couldn't get on there. You're like, 11 o'clock at night and start Googling like what's going on and stuff. And I mean, and just to put it in perspective, like, if you were to leave for Naples today, it looks a lot different, right? You got smartphones, you got ways to connect, like, being an 18-year-old kid, leaving the United States, going to Naples, Italy, that's a big deal in 1988. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
So.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think it might have been easier on the parents back then. They just didn't know what they didn't know, right?
True. Yeah.
We didn't know what we didn't know. Like it was like,
yeah. Usually until first day of basic training, and then you were like, "Oh, what have I gotten myself into?" But
I mean, arguably the Marine Corps has probably the best thing to break anybody in.
Oh yeah.
It
was nice
the
being
boot
on
camp. Is just just watch this clip for a little bit, and you'll kind of get a taste of what it's like. So I don't know if it's good. I wonder if that's good or bad. I mean, I have it that it could be both, right?
Yeah, I'd agree.
But for me, there was that uneasiness that like what's going to happen was
true. But I think
kind of addicting.
That was probably part of the part of the attraction too, in a certain way. Like not knowing very much about what you were getting yourself into was an adventure in and of itself. And, and then once you started doing from basic training onward, you started doing some of the things that some of them you thought, oh yeah, this is what I had in my mind. Yeah. Of course there's other things, that you had no idea, but they're also funny at the same time. Like, just a boot camp story. And Marine Corps basic training is no joke, but, my bunkmate, a guy named Larry Knight, he and I our biggest problem was we thought everything was hilarious, which drill instructors don't think that that's funny when you think that other things are funny and nuts. But we laughed our way all through basic training and got really strong too, because we'd start busting out laughing and about the strangest, anything really. And then we'd get, sent to the quarterdeck and had to do push-ups and whatever, but we even laughed through that. So it was, so even the times that, I think a lot of media and movies and whatever, they make it out like everybody thinks it's Full Metal Jacket all the time, and that movie actually came out while I was in basic training.
Great movie, by the way.
Yes. So a lot of people thought it was going to be like that. But it was really, and it was hard, but if you can laugh through it, like, I guess that's like any kind of military training or anything, if you can maintain your sense of humor through it, it makes it go by,
Yeah, I think it is like, there's like that time of understanding what it really is, right? But it's also, if you go back, there's so many funny things that happen, like including what you're doing as well, like how ridiculous you're acting, but just that whole thing is, it's and a lot of times you be very serious, but nobody tends to think any of those times are supposed to be funny, especially anybody in the chain of command or training you, they get a little.
Although years later, when I was a drill instructor, I had the same problem, but I was the one dishing out the things, and I spent more time, with my head tilted down in the campaign cover, covering my face because it was hilarious. No, but now you're the one prompting the ridiculousness. But yeah, so
your boss, that's what your past boss, Sean. That's one thing I was thinking about on your CAD rates is kind of different but the same. But there's things that happen, and it's so serious to everyone else around there. But when you don't even realize, like, everybody just disappears because they're all laughing about something. It's like something is just somebody's done something that's just so like just crazy. You're like, oh my God, I don't think I've ever seen that. Or there's a lot of, I think that's what brings it together. It's that there's a lot of like very strong emotions. I would say for all that, especially in the training environment, a lot of highs, a lot of lows. Not a lot in between, I think.
No, it's one or the other typically.
Yeah, which is like kind of tied into what I felt like was growing up. A lot of highs and lows, which is good. So, felt comfortable. So you head over to Naples.
Yep.
Did you study up on Italian before you head over there?
No, okay, not at all. Nope. Got over there. And you can, like a lot of folks that get stationed overseas, you can, if you choose to, be one of those people that never leaves the base and you never have a need to learn the language or the culture or anything like that. I wasn't one of those. And I always joke that my wife, because my wife, her father was in the military. He was in the Marine Corps and the Air Force. So she, throughout her childhood, she had lived in Italy 3 different times. So she actually spoke Italian. And I tell people I would have learned Italian when I was over there, except, somebody kept jumping in and speaking for me, which
was she a dependent there when you met her? Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And when we first got there, the first sergeant pulled us in and was like laying down the law and telling us, do this, don't do this. And I distinctly remember him saying, and whatever you do, don't talk to the high school girls, because the base that we were on and where our barracks was also on was connected to the DOD or DOT, whatever it is, the Defense Department schools. So the high school was right there next to the base. And then usually the older classmen, I think they were allowed to leave the school and come onto the base and go to like the Burger King or whatever it was that was on the base. So you'd see the senior girls. Now keep in mind that sounds slightly creepy, but the fact that we were only
18 years old. Yeah. So,
So within, I made it 6 months, and then I actually met my wife at a big 4th of July festival that they have at a park there in Naples. And So from 4th of July of 1988 is when we met. So, but then we'd travel around Italy. We went up to northern Italy near Aviano Air Force Base because her dad had been stationed up there. So we'd take road trips, and we went up there one time. Traveled a lot, whereas like getting back to what I had mentioned before, some of the guys that were there never left the base. It was, which I don't understand that.
I think that's still going on.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it is. And then it was the same way years later when I was stationed in Germany. There were some folks that never went out in town, but I guess that I always had the adventurous spirit, which is why one of the things we like to do in our spare time when we have the time and the money is to travel to new places and go see new things. And so it started back then and it's continued ever since.
So pretty short assignment there, 1 year.
It was supposed to be a 2-year, but a year into it, there's a town called Gaeta, about an hour north of Naples, and that's where the flagship for the U.S. 6th Fleet is headquartered. And they had a small Marine detachment, but I guess they were phasing that detachment out. But they lost too many people. So they ended up pulling 3 guys from Naples. And I was one of those 3. So I was a year in Naples and then up to Gaeta on the ship for 9 months. And that's when we got to go to the Soviet Union.
So the Belknap, what kind of ship is that?
It was a cruiser.
Okay.
Yeah. So not a very big ship. And it had the 2 commands. It had the 6th Fleet staff. And that had a vice admiral was the head of the 6th Fleet. So we were basically, they didn't call it that back then, but we were like PSD for the admiral.
So I got a lot of jokes about the Navy and the Marine Corps, but you're the first person we've had on that was actually a Marine on a ship. So what is that like being a Marine? I'm going to hold off my jokes, but
okay.
In all seriousness, what's it like being in a Marine detachment on a ship of
It was actually great. Probably the best assignment I ever had in 27 plus years in the military, because our detachment was small. It was only 9 of us, I think. And at the time I was just an E3. I was a Lance Corporal. But if we were escorting the admiral anywhere, everybody would scatter out of the way like cockroaches when the lights came on. And, so we were we thought we were pretty important.
Like a big shit.
Yeah, pretty much. So, and the best part is, so the admiral had his own kitchen staff. So we would get the admiral's leftovers, and of course, admirals don't eat, slop. Yeah. He was getting like gourmet meals, and we would get all the leftovers. So, and also admirals usually don't usually go to crappy places. So in the 9 months that I was on the Belknap, I got to travel up to that point. I'd only been to, in and around Naples and in Italy. Did go to Oktoberfest 1 year when I was still down in Naples. But I got on the ship, and in that 9 months time, we went to like several places in Spain, several places in France, several more different places in Italy. I got to go to Dubrovnik, which at the time was still in part of Yugoslavia. I guess it's Croatia now. And then got to go to Israel, got to go to Turkey. So just in that 9 months, I went to all those different places. And then they eventually deactivated the Mardet. And since I still had a few months left in my 2 years that I was supposed to be over there, they sent me back down to Naples to finish up.
So. You did mention you went to the Soviet Union on a pretty historic trip that time, right?
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, for a lot of people, that don't remember that was the height of the Cold War. We weren't the greatest of friends with the right. Soviet Union. Right. I guess we're not the greatest of friends now with Russia. Right. I don't know how you look at it, but what was that like being, going to visit?
It was pretty. It
was considered our biggest enemy at the time.
Yeah. Overall, it was awesome. So pretty much what happened was the Soviets had sent 3 ships to Norfolk, Virginia, as a kind of we're starting to become, the Cold War is starting to thaw kind of thing. So in return, they were supposed to send 3 U.S. ships, the Belknap being one of them. So as we were heading toward the Black Sea to go to Sevastopol, a Marine lieutenant colonel who had gotten kidnapped in Lebanon, in Beirut, I guess a video was released of him being hung. So that was a big deal. So all 3 ships detoured from the Black Sea, sat off the coast of Beirut. And again, we went where the admiral went. So when he was in the war room on the ship, discussing things way, way, way far above our level, but we were still in the room. So they were talking about doing some pretty major stuff. But things kind of calmed down a little bit, and they decided, well, we're going to keep the Belknap down here off the coast of Beirut and bring in the rest of the warships to sit off the coast until we figure out what we're going to do. So just to kind of show you the mentality, well, they picked the two, they decided that 2 Marines were going to go. So of course they picked the 2 junior Marines, and I was one of those. So just the mindset, of course, of young Marines back then, like in our minds, we were disappointed and mad because we were like, oh, these guys are going to go get some. And we're stuck going to this, dog and pony show somewhere. And in the end, it worked out pretty well for us because they ended up not doing anything. And we cross-decked, went to another ship called the Kaufman. And so only 2 ships went up. But it was eerie when we were about to pull into the town because, we were manning the rails. So we're all standing at like parade rest on the upper deck of the ship as we're pulling in. And it kind of hit me because my whole life to that point, the Soviets were the boogeyman. They were the worst of the worst. And all of the training, that I had done up to that point in the Marine Corps was, everything indicated that the Soviets were the bad guys. And that was our main enemy and enemy at all costs. And then here we were, ships pulling into dock or pulling into the port, and people are, huge crowds on the shore, people clapping, waving American flags and, throwing flowers and all kind. And I was just like, this is weird. Like it was kind of a very strange, that was the first time I'd ever seen the bad guys up close and personal. And then we did a lot of cool stuff while we were there again. So the Navy sent a 3-star admiral to represent. He was the senior guy there. The Army and the Air Force, I think they sent major generals. Maybe one of them might have been a brigadier general. And then the Marine Corps sent 2 lance corporals, which I always got a kick out of, admiral, generals, and 2 lance corporals. But we represented.
If anyone can screw this up, it's going to be those 2 now.
Yeah. Yeah. So we ended up doing a bunch of stuff there. We had to wear our uniforms out in town. So we were in our dress blues walking around, and all these, Soviets were like the friendliest people ever. At one point, somebody was getting married and they were doing their wedding pictures, and they like practically chased us down, brought us over, and we posed in their wedding picture with them, which I always wish I would have got a copy of it somehow, but
that's somewhere in somewhere in Russia, like someone's explaining like, who are these Marines, and explain
why are they in your wedding photos.
I think it's even more crazy. It's just the time of the time too. Like, again, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't all these pictures, a lot of like uncertainty of what's going on, like what was it going to look like. I mean, we didn't like, you didn't even know what the like I remember like coming in, not when we came in, it was like a lot of stuff was like we were still looking at like cards of BRDMs and all this kind of stuff. Like it was like there was no like this crazy, go on the internet, this is what a BRDM looks like running around. It was like, oh, here's a 7 of hearts. Here's a 7 of hearts. Like, what is that? Like it's so crazy to think about, being that age and that time to just roll into somewhere and then thinking you're going to get treated a certain way. And
it was great. We kind of how I mentioned about being on the Belknap, admirals don't get treated poorly. So we went to all these receptions. So we literally were like eating caviar and drinking champagne, and they took us to one of the Soviet Marine, the naval infantry bases, and they did the whole amphibious landing reenactment thing, and like a hand-to-hand combat demonstration where they were like breaking 2x4s over this shirtless, Ivan Drago looking dude. It was crazy, but fun. It was good. It was a good time. I remember when we would drive to different places while we were there, all the intel dudes were laying in the back seat of these cars that we had, like snapping pictures and things, is like trying to gather as much intel because they'd never had that opportunity before. That close,
That's so crazy. Such crazy times. So your fun ends in beautiful Italy. And you get to go to beautiful Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
You kind of get your teeth wet as a 0311 there with some of the jobs.
Yep. So I had gotten promoted to corporal the last month I was in Italy. So not only was I going to the fleet for the first time, but I was going as an NCO already, which is usually, I'd been marching around looking, we did security in Naples was our primary thing, but we also did a lot of ceremonial stuff. So I hadn't really been out in the field, you know, out in the mud, out in the muck. And I'd already been in for 2 years. So it was kind of a weird dynamic, but it worked out really well. Very high op tempo as soon as I got there. First 6 months, I think we went to Fort AP Hill, Virginia for a month of training. We went out to the ranges for a full month of marksmanship training. And then I ended up getting, fortunately, again, going, you know, for the same reason I just mentioned, I was an NCO, but didn't really know NCO stuff, at least not in the fleet. So I got to go to NCO school and graduated that on a Friday. And the following Monday, I was at Infantry Squad Leaders course, which is like a 2-month, you know.
Let's talk about that before we get into that. Like, so, you know, we've had, you know, a few fair share of Marines on, and we've talked about, you know, the Marine Corps, especially, you know, when you make NCO, it's like a different level. So going into, you know, 2.8 or 3.8 infantry, you know, you've been out doing, like, a lot of these guys, other fellow Marines, you've been like fucking off, right? You haven't been really doing what you're supposed to be doing. So you come in. They used
to call them barracks babies.
You come in, and now you're in charge. Like, was there a lot of like pushback from some of these Marines, or was it like a pretty receptive atmosphere?
It was pretty receptive. I know some of the only kind of like stink eye that I ever got from anybody was maybe some of the NCOs that were already there that's all they had done in their time, that same amount of time that I'd been in. Right. They had been in the same time, but they'd spent all their time at Lejeune or, you know, doing grunt stuff.
So did it help or hurt you? You think?
I think it helped because it kind of, you know, I definitely, and those like me, because there were several of us that came from different barracks around the world and got there at the same time. I think it helped because it put that extra little bit of pressure that you had to be better. You know, you couldn't slack off, but, you know, even more so because these other NCOs would just eat you alive.
Yeah, they want you to fail. They're like, look at this guy.
Yeah. Now the guys that we were in charge of, you know, as a team leader, you know, initially, you know, they were going to do what they had to do, what they were told to do for the most part. I never got any kind of like questioning from any of them because they were all new too. They had just gotten to the fleet, so they didn't question anything. But yeah, but I'd say the only thing was a little bit of stink eye from some of the other NCOs because they were like, oh, well, while you were out there screwing off in Italy, you know, I was out here in the field, and but not much. I mean, just maybe a little hint of it. But again, I think the op tempo probably got rid of a lot of that too because we were just so busy. And then as soon as I finished squad leader school, a week before it was supposed to be a scheduled Mediterranean deployment, but a week before we shipped out is when Iraq invaded Kuwait. So by all accounts, we thought, okay, well, we know we know we're not going to the Med now. We know where we're going until we didn't. Yeah. And then that brought us to Liberia and the Operation Sharp Edge there because of the civil war that was going on. And so while the whole rest of the military was getting piled up on top of each other in Saudi Arabia, our unit, you know, unbeknownst to, again, this is pre-cell phone and computer. So everything was just snail mail that, you know, it took weeks at least for mail to go back and forth, if not longer. So everybody in our families thought we had gone to the Persian Gulf or whatever, but in reality, we had just cut across the Atlantic and set off the coast of Liberia initially, and then went in and did a big evacuation operation.
Yeah, I want to talk Liberia because I think a lot of people like probably don't even know what was going on, but like some major civil war was going on, some really like, for lack of a better term, some really bad shit was going on.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of people, you know, I think as history pulls, there was just some Navy SEALs were involved. A lot of things were going on at that time. But like, what was that like to go in there and see what was going on? I mean, where you see like just for lack of, there's a lot of brutality. We don't have to get graphic about it, but it wasn't a good thing. Like, what was that like, you know, rolling in and seeing?
Yeah, it was
the Civil War.
It was definitely eye-opening. Now for me, I mean, looking back at it years later, I felt like my first like real thing that I was a part of. I mean, the trip to the Soviet Union and whatever was very cool, but it wasn't like the first like real thing that I encountered was the bombing that you mentioned in Naples in 1988. Now I wasn't like at the USO, but you know, we were on the base. The one of our NCOs came busting in the doors, and you know, and we thought we thought, okay, we're about to get in shootouts with, terrorists or whatnot. That ended up not happening, but, I mean, a sailor and I think 5 Italians were killed in the bombing and a whole bunch of people wounded. And the USO wasn't very far from our base, but we went, so that was the first kind of real thing. But then when we get to Liberia and there, 4 different factions fighting each other, all sorts of,
awful shit.
Yeah, awful stuff going on. I would say we were concerned, but we were still young. So we were actually totally up for it. Like we wanted, every young soldier or Marine in the infantry, like that they want to go to, or at least at the time, they think they want to go to war. They want to prove themselves in like the big game kind of thing. And we were no different. We couldn't wait to get in there. So we rotated the platoons in and out of the embassy. We did security for the embassy. Some of the stuff, and I was talking to some of my buddies from that unit recently, and just about the different things that kind of stuck out in our minds from that time. And I remember that for me, it was, I remember there was a young boy wheeling a wheelbarrow up the street with was probably his parents' bodies or siblings or something in the wheelbarrow, because what they were doing is there were so many that they were just taking them down to the beach and dumping them into the surf. So I remember seeing that early on. And so that picture still is kind of in my head. That, and when they would rotate the platoons out, we'd go back out onto our ship, which was just sitting off the coast. And I remember, again, bodies floating and kind of like doinking off the side of the ship as they were floating by, because again, they were dumping all the bodies in the surf to get rid of them. So those things kind of stick in your head, and and that's when it kind of starts getting real, at least as far as, hey, this isn't just like a training scenario, bang, bang, I got you, or, Miles gear or something where you beep if you get killed. Like there's actual for real people dying here. Fortunately, it was none of us, but unfortunately, it was, a lot of the civilians.
So you're seeing that you talked about the desire. I get it. Yeah. To go to war, but is there also desire to are you feeling any guilty? You can't help these people because you're seeing this stuff happen and you're not able to really do stuff. Was there any of that thought process going through your head at the time, or was it just, not focused on it?
No, I mean, at that time, me personally, no, I was still that young, hard charger. I wanted to get off the embassy compound. We all wanted to. We thought we were going to be going door to door and doing infantry guy stuff. But I think now years later, after a few more deployments, that's where that kind of that regret about not being able to help people more kind of that was in me more later deployments, like GWAT time frame. But back then, I was still young, and I probably say somewhat stupid, and thought I just wanted to get some, and why do they keep us on the embassy? Why don't they let us go out in town and hunt these different bands of bad guys down? And of course, we all.
Yeah, but I think I hope we don't hold anything back, because I kind of look at that back as like there was a certain time when we were what we were meant to be, right? And that's what you're supposed to do. And then I think GWAT did change that, right? You became not only you're supposed to be this enforcer, but you're also supposed to be this nation builder, all this kind of stuff. So I can get it where that starts to creep in of that's at the time you're part of the 8th Marine Regiment. Your job is to go,
locate, close with, and destroy.
Exactly. Yeah. So I get it. Yeah, I get it. So you have those jobs for a while. You get to, I think, what I've been looking forward to. We've not had. You're our first Marine drill instructor. So
that job.
What led you to that path? Was it something you chose, or did they choose for you? And
no, well, and again, having looking back at things, I didn't in the Marine Corps. In order to be a drill instructor, you actually have to request to do it. Unlike what I found out later, oftentimes in the Army, where the Army says, "Hey, you're going to go do this." Right. Not all the time, but sometimes. But in the Marine Corps, I actually re-enlisted. Remember, I told you my first enlistment was for 6 years. So I was about to do a 3rd deployment with 8th Marines. So we did the Liberia deployment. We did the, and then, that was a 7-month deployment, by the way, the one in Liberia. And then we came back to Camp Lejeune for 3 months, and then immediately pushed back out for another 6 months. And that was for Desert Storm and Provide Comfort, which we were reserved for both of those. So not a whole lot action, but we did do a lot of training all around the Mediterranean, North Africa. But so I hadn't re-enlisted. We got back to Camp Lejeune. I hadn't re-enlisted yet. So just a quick little side note. If you don't have enough time to do that next deployment, which for me would have been my third one, they have it's called the Fleet Assistance Program. So we called it FAP. So we'd say you'd get FAP'd out. So some guys got FAP'd out to the gym to, hand out towels or whatever. So I actually got, for 6 months, I was a base game warden at Camp Lejeune.
There you go.
So so I got to hang out with drive around in 4-wheel drive vehicles all over Camp Lejeune with my little 38 revolver, which never made sense to me. I'm like, wait, we're potentially going to be going up against, poachers that have high powered rifles, and you give me a 38 revolver. But so did that. And then, while I was on that job, it was time to, either re-enlist or get out. So I ended up re-enlisting, and I re-enlisted to go to drill instructor school. At the time, I thought, this is perfect. Like, I'm a hard charger, people that go and be drill instructors, at the time there were like 3 duties at the time that would seal your career success. It was either recruiting, which I knew I didn't want to do that. Marine,
that work out for you, but we'll talk about that later.
Marine security guard, which is embassy duty. But in order to do that, that's the one I wanted to do really. But if you were married, you had to be a staff sergeant. So, and I was a sergeant at that time. So I wasn't able to do that one. So the only thing left was drill instructor, which, everybody that's ever been a Marine thinks, oh, how cool would it be to be a drill instructor? And I was no different. So as it turns out, it was, I guess the best way to summarize it is it was probably one of the best and worst duties I ever had. Best because, if you stand back and look, or even better, if you run into some of the guys that you put through and that you trained to become Marines, that's kind of an awesome feeling. Plus it's one of those like really cool shit talking things like, oh, I was a drill instructor. On the downside, the job sucks. Like 7 days a week, and this was again, back when we had to iron our uniforms and shine our boots, like spit shine our boots. And everybody had their little landing patch, stupid haircut thing, the super retarded high and tight. But anyway, so it was very grueling, not very family friendly kind of job. But again, it's one of those things, like, it's very cool to be able to have done that. It's also very competitive in the Marine Corps anyway, because a lot of guys, and that's also the first time in my Marine Corps career to that point that I'd worked directly with any other MOSs. Up till like when I was in Naples, that was all infantry guys. When I was at Camp Lejeune, it was all infantry guys, and it was all dudes, like, at the time. So there were so I went from that to, I get the drill instructor school in first day. And I didn't realize this till I got there, but there's only one drill instructor school. Now, basic recruit training in the Marine Corps is, I don't know if it still is, but it was split. The males trained with males and the females trained with females, and there was no mixing and matching. So I get the drill instructor school, and the first formation at, whatever time in the morning, and there were females in the formation. And I'm like, oh, maybe, I guess they'll split us up once, they fall us out of formation, but they didn't. So that was kind of and that was different, but not bad at all. They were very squared away too. But the harder or the weirder thing was working directly with people of, all different MOSs, the butchers, the bakers, the candlestick makers. And I'd spent my entire time in the military at that point with nothing but a bunch of, mouth breathing grunts, so that was probably the weirdest thing for me. But
so for some people to know, like, the Marine Corps, everybody goes to recruit. It doesn't matter your MOS, goes to either Paris Island or now San Diego. So it doesn't matter your MOS, it just branches off after that. Whereas the Army has specific, drill sergeants. Like, so if you're going into the Signal Corps, you're generally going there. So that makes sense.
Yeah. So, and it's very competitive. And by competitive, some people are very competitive. So there's a little bit of backstabbing going on among the ranks, which again, I'd never really dealt with that, before, especially from people that, like, it was, in some cases, it was like they had a totally different mindset. I mean, they were Marines and they were squared away Marines because they were obviously going through drill instructor school, but they're kind of a different mindset than what I was used to. But it was, again, it was a great experience. And I'm glad I did it. But looking back, I wish I would have, I wish I would have done a different duty. Like I probably, looking back after the fact, I thought, wow, I should have gone back to Marine Security Forces, gone back somewhere cool overseas. And, which later on, years later, they ended up, I think they made that Marine Security Force MOS they added it to the cluster of MOSs that you had to do in order to further your career. But at the time, it seemed like a good idea.
You wouldn't have that cool photo of you.
True.
Now, I mean, that's a pretty cool photo.
Yeah. If nothing else, I got a cool picture out of it.
So I mean, the op tempo is I think you're like the second or third, drill sergeant, drill instructor we've had on, and that op tempo is you always talk about seeing that. It looks like a crazy thing until you're in the middle of it, and then you're going and going like, PT starts at this time. You guys are there earlier. You've got to still maintain everything you're doing yourself. And it's just, it always like, I think I lost like 30 pounds, 30 pounds, like through my first cycle. My first cycle that I worked was in the middle of the summer in Southern South Carolina. So, I mean, I'd look my uniform, Marine drill instructor, they're supposed to be the most squared away, the most fit. You don't really PT. So I was in the worst shape of my life or my career at that point. I looked like trash because I'd lost like 20 pounds. So my uniform was just hanging off of me. I'm like, this isn't making sense. Like we're supposed to be like the poster representatives of the Marine Corps. And we all look like we just, did the Bataan Death March or something So let's have some fun here. Like, we already know Full Metal Jacket. What's another great Marine drill sergeant movie?
Well, I don't know. Like a lot of us, we're very critical of any military movie or military TV shows or movies because a lot of them are so inaccurate. Now it's not drill instructor related, but I really like Band of Brothers. That whole series. Didn't like the
Pacific.
Yeah, I didn't like Pacific as much. But I don't know. I'd say
it's a hard answer because I can't. I'm trying to think of anything other one. I think that movie is like what everybody will base being a Marine DI on for like generation after generation.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like I said, it came out while I was in boot camp, and I didn't know it at the time until after a couple months down the road. But one of my drill instructors was quoting verbatim lines from the movie. At the time, I thought it was his original. Like, this guy's hilarious. And then after boot camp, probably after I got to Italy, I actually saw the movie for the first time. I was like, that wasn't his own idea. He was just quoting the movie. But
I was fortunate enough. I did military sales for a bit, and we'd go down to Modern Day Marine at Lejeune, and a friend of mine worked at a place where they would have him, come in like as like a meet and greet. And the craziest thing was, like, the first time I was there, you would just see like 100 Marines standing in line, right? And you're like, who is it? So you're thinking it's like, like the commandant of the Marine Corps or something, and it's Emory, and you'd sit there and like I remember my buddy was up in there, so we were able to go through like before this. So I walk in there and they're playing. And these, the modern day tents are in there, and like he's sitting there just having a barbecue before everyone's coming in, and like he's watching Full Metal Jacket. So I was like, this is my opportunity to sit down and talk to him. So I sit to him, I'm like, and I'm just like, you don't know what to say, but I talk to him like, hey, like it's like I know you've done you got a lot of movies, but like this is like the movie you're best known for. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I've done a lot of stuff, and he's like, this is, and I'm like, is it crazy to watch this? And he's like, I don't think I've seen the whole movie all the way through, maybe like once or twice. And he's like, it kind of sucks after I die. And I was just we just kind of laugh and we're talking about it. But like I got to go back the next year and see him again. And like, he's such a humble guy, like, and it was crazy to watch him. But I mean, the amount of like, I have it too, that movie, as crazy as it was like huge to get a lot of people to go into the Marine Corps. That was like the challenge, right? Like,
yeah, which you wouldn't think after watching the movie that it would be a recruiting tool, but in a weird sort of way, it did kind of end up being, which I don't think they had that in mind when they made it.
And I think I have a Full Metal Jacket autograph. Did I give it to you, Dad? A movie? I've got it somewhere where he signed it for us, but it was like, and I watched him, like a bunch of people trying to give him stuff. And he's like, give him to these young Marines. I don't need any of this kind of stuff, but it's always one of the famous people I got to meet, which I always think is pretty cool because
Yeah.
you know, when you see him, just the stuff he did not in that movie for I have it as being a recruiting tool, but just what he continued to do for the Marine Corps and the military was huge.
Yeah.
He was always a driving force there.
Oh yeah, he's definitely an icon.
Yeah,
not just in the Marine, mostly in the Marine Corps, but just military wide.
I don't know though. I feel like he still has like some overwhelming power over everybody though. I mean, I get it from the Marine Corps, but I still feel like if you were in the military our time, like if you saw him, you're going to kind of nerd out a little bit.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I actually had one of my soldiers from Germany when I worked for Sean. He PCS'd back stateside, and I got a package in the mail just out of the blue. And I think he went to like Fort Hood or somewhere, the soldier, and Lee Ermey went there and did some speaking engagement. And my soldier actually got him to autograph, to Lieutenant McCune, U.S. Army. And I was like, oh, I bet you he loved signing that one. But
just signing on. But it was crazy to watch. I think somebody was like, yeah, if you had like whatever the bulldog is, or the mascot, or like Chesty, or like him, or they'd be in line more than they would be to meet the commandant or the command sergeant major of the Marine Corps. Which
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, which is awesome. So one other question, we're gonna put you on the spot. So I recently asked somebody who was a DI, what's the better? Where's it better to be a DI?
Oh, and
Parris Island or San Diego?
Parris Island.
All right, cool.
Yeah,
I think it's a given, but
yeah. Some may argue that, but I'm a little biased. I was there for the receiving and the giving out of the love. So
yeah. I figured we'd answer that anyways, but I don't hear anybody that went to Parris Island that's will say that San Diego was better. I mean, maybe the weather's better, but
yeah, that just makes them soft.
I love that you guys still have that competition amongst yourselves. So you leave that job, you decide that's when you decide to get out of the Army here for a little bit.
Yep.
I'm sorry, the Marine Corps, head back here to Ohio.
Yep. Yeah. So at that point, I had like almost 10 years, I think, active duty in the Marine Corps. And I kind of mentioned this to you earlier, at that point I was like 27, 28. Ended up, even though I'm not from here, my mom and stepdad had moved to Ohio years before. So I actually came to just visit them and ended up staying. I had my first frustration with not being nearly as valued as what I thought I was.
Yeah, I was hoping you to talk about that. So, you're fortunate to have a couple of transitions, I would call.
Yeah.
Right. So this is your first transition, late 20s. Everybody's been listening for 45 minutes. I mean, if you just culminate to like all the way up to being a DI at Parris Island, all the deployments and all the responsibility you have, here you are 28 years old, head back to Central Ohio. And you shared before we started that like, you're like, holy shit, it's like the first kick in the teeth that,
because I thought all the stuff I had done I thought I was really awesome. And come to find out, nobody really cared. I was, unemployed. I was trying to get jobs, and the jobs I could get were just, bullshit jobs. I was like, I felt like, don't you know who I am kind of thing, or don't you know what I've done? But nobody cared. They, outside of the Marine Corps, didn't matter how much cool guy stuff you did in the Marine Corps, unless the person that you were trying to get a job with had been in the military, but they're few and far between. I ended up doing. So
let's before we start about what we're doing, let's talk about that feeling that's going on, putting aside all the mask and bullshit. Like, what does that feel like? You've done all this stuff. You're getting like pretty much, shunned by these jobs, the responsibility level. What is it like? What were you honestly feeling like at that time?
Oh, I felt kind of pissed off, but also depressed, which I was going to touch on that again with, later conversation. But, you go from that feeling, that responsibility for literally for other people's lives, there is no greater responsibility than that. And then you get out and nobody cares. And that was when it first happened to me. And then years later, I look back at it and I'm like, okay, now I get one of the reasons why we have the issues that we're having currently, with veteran suicides and substance abuse and things like that, is because I'm sure I'm not the only one where people get out and these guys have gone to war, have held the ultimate responsibility, and they come back home and they can't get a job, or, things just, it goes from up here all the way down here. So that brings on depression and frustration and anger. And And it was a surprise to me because for 10 years, my most formative 10 years of my young life, you could tangibly look at what you've done, because it all goes in your record book or whatever. And, it goes on the ribbons on your chest, and without having to dig, like what people have done and what that means. But then all of a sudden that rug gets pulled out from under you and you're out flailing in the civilian world, can't really get a job. And if you can, you feel like you're worth more than that. Right. Not just financially, just responsibility as well. Yeah. So that was when that first hit me. And even, so a lot of
people. Did you pick up any bad habits on like, were you doing anything that you shouldn't have been doing, or?
I drank pretty regularly, like a lot. But outside of that, I mean, no, I guess me. Now a lot of guys do, but I don't know. I felt like the drinking and the partying and now one thing that kept me grounded at that same time, which is probably why I didn't, go and get into anything else bad, was as soon as I got to Columbus, I joined the Marine Reserve Unit here in town, Lima Company 325. So even if it was 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year during annual training, you still had that brotherhood. So it was almost like an escape.
Right.
Once a month I got to escape back to people that I understood and people that understood me. And there was the rank structure and the respect for what I'd done before and respect for the other Marines in the unit. And we would still go do cool guy stuff, kicking indoors and, fast roping out helicopters or whatever, So thank goodness for that. Cause if I wouldn't have done that, I don't know. I don't know how far down the spiral I would have gone. I wouldn't say I was spiraling, but but it was definitely good for me. And I used to volunteer too, because I don't know if they still do it, but back when I was with Lima Company, anytime a Marine veteran passed away and asked for it, I don't know how it worked exactly, but they would have a Marine detachment come and do their funeral. So we would get in our dress blues and we'd go out to, the Korean War vets and Vietnam vets, their funerals and whatnot. Probably at that time, even some World War II vets in our dress blues, looking sharp, and we, doing the whole ceremony. So I used to do that in addition to the 1 weekend a month thing. And anytime there were like ceremonies, or I remember one time there was a 5K or something near Easton, and a bunch of us volunteered, and we, carried the guide on and sang cadence and ran around Easton. And so I tried to do as much with that reserve unit as I could, because that was it was kind of like my anchor. While all this other civilian life stuff was, at times shitty, I at least had that. Right. And there I was still somebody, I wasn't just some schmuck, corporate security guy at the Wendy's headquarters up in Dublin, wearing a clip-on tie and an ugly blazer, where people like look down their noses at me. And, and even I started taking classes, which was equally weird, because there I was, a 28-year-old in the same classes with 18-year-olds. So that's good that I pursued that. But it was kind of, sometimes it was also because they also didn't want to, it was like they were in their little 18-year-old bubble world, and I still had to work, 1 or 2 jobs. And, then I ended up getting married, had a kid, so now I have bills to pay and responsibilities, and they're basically just 18-year-old college students, not a care in the world. So I didn't really I didn't hang out with any of them, didn't go party. People used to laugh when they find out I graduated from OSU, and they're like, "Oh, going to the shoe and the Buckeye games." And for decades I was like, "Don't know, never been." They were like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, I was a grown up when I went to college. So, I never went to a game, never went to a party. Never."
Don't worry, Josh, though, they're just like totally judging. He's like, "Oh my God, what the hell's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I think the time is an interesting thing, because I think, it's not the fault, it's people, because you said, and I'm glad you did, is even today, I mean, I'll leave this question till we talk about your ultimate transition out, but also at the time, right, you're talking about, like, I feel like there was a, 9/11 changed a lot how people started to really kind of look at military people in some aspects. I feel like before that, it was like, if you went to the military, it was like,
yeah, it was like,
oh, like kind of like they did. I mean, even if you're in, like, look, I remember going to my a high school reunion, and like people were like, "Oh, you went in the military," like it was a bad thing, and I'm like, I'm a captain in the Army right now. Like, I mean,
oh yeah,
but they're like, oh, like you couldn't do anything else. I'm like, I have a degree. Like, I mean, like, but yeah, but pre 9/11, I argue. I mean, like, I'm not going to get to like that. We're going back to like the 60s or something like that. But there wasn't that huge appreciation for people in the military, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
A lot of it, I think, was that time frame, like you couldn't make it anywhere else. So that's why you went there. So yeah, I get it. And then, and you weren't coming out at, what I would consider a normal transition age of like, maybe like, 22, 24, you're 28 years old. Like you said, that's a decade's a long ass time to do something and come back and do that. So,
and even the work that I did do, was just very low level, low paying security stuff while I was going to school. But I remember being, around at work. And so, like you just mentioned, when I was at school, people were looking at me like I was some kind of freak because they were like, who's the old guy? And like, which I, now I look back and I'm like, yeah, I remember back when I thought people in their late 20s were old. But so I was like the weirdo at school. And then at work, as a corporate office. So people were like, looked down on me there. I felt like, so yeah, there's definitely some struggles doing that transition. And whether it's one enlistment, or 30 years, I think, because I also learned after my final transition out which I thought I'd set myself up for success when I finally retired, but ended up really hitting the same problem, not the look down upon part, but the still can't get a job paying what I'm worth and giving me the responsibility that I work jobs and I'm like, everybody in charge is a fucking idiot, and I'm like, but I can't get, but we'll get into that part later. But yeah. So eventually I was a criminal justice major, by the way, like everybody else that gets out of the military and goes to school. But I went to a seminar, or I think it was for like extra credit. I was in a general anthropology course. And they had a seminar and they were like, oh yeah, there's this cool seminar. So it was before this, the TV show CSI, but the seminar was basically like a CSI episode. And I was like, this stuff is cool. So I thought, well, everybody and their brother gets a criminal justice degree. So maybe if I get a forensic anthropology degree with maybe a minor in criminal justice, that'll kind of give me a leg up on, because I was thinking at the time I was going to go law enforcement.
Yeah. So
that's why I switched my major from criminal justice to anthropology, forensic anthropology specifically, but which of course, as soon as I graduated, never touched it ever again.
First person I know that had an anthropology degree.
Yeah. So that's how that came to being. But I graduated. I applied tested for FBI, U.S. Marshals. A good buddy of mine, a guy named Tony Story. He and I drove. They were doing the U.S. Marshals exam in Chicago, and he had a buddy that he had served with on active duty that lived there. So we drove from here to Chicago. Thought it was a good idea to go out drinking all night. Showed up at the Marshals exam, still totally hungover. But somehow or another, we both passed. Just like the initial test for the FBI, I'd passed that as well. And then, for whatever reason, almost all the federal agencies that I had applied to, they were like, hey, thanks for applying. You passed the test. It's going great, but we're in the middle of a hiring freeze. So don't call us, we'll call you, kind of thing. So that was the summer of 2001. And then the only thing of note before we get to 9/11 is another of the, really cool things I got to do was compete in the Super Squad competition. And then 2001, we ended up winning. We were one of the winning squad. So we got transported to Washington, D.C., got to march out on the parade deck for the silent drill team ceremony there. Got to, the commandant and the sergeant major of the Marine Corps pinned our Super Squad badges on. All my guys got meritorious promotion on the spot.
Oh, cool.
By those two. So that's kind of because I wear it on the picture of me and my full deal. There's a gold badge, which really freaks people out in the Army. They, for when I wear it in the Army, they're like, "What in the world is that?" Or
"What is that?"
Yeah.
So, are you allowed to wear that?
Yeah. So even in the Marine Corps, it's pretty rare. And then during most of the GWAT timeframe. I think they stopped doing the competition, but people would ask me what it is, and I would be like, well, the easiest thing to compare it to would be like best Ranger competition kind of thing, but it's a Marine Corps thing, and it's an entire rifle squad, and it lasts like a week, and you do all sorts of infantry stuff, competing against other squads representing each of their I was going to say battalions, but that's not it. Regiments, I guess. Yeah. But so that was a cool thing. But 25 days after we were in DC and got our super squad badges is when 9/11 happened. So, and then that sort of set off a chain of events that, eventually I ended up in the Army. So, which was, I had a degree. I was on standby for federal law enforcement, but I was also married, had a son, had a stepson, had responsibilities and bills. So at the time that on the day that 9/11 happened, I got into there was a program called Troops to Teachers. I don't know if they still have it.
I remember that. Yeah.
But I was able to get into that program, and I was a substitute school teacher in Westerville School District. And so I was actually teaching, and there was a teacher's assistant that worked at the same school, and he came busting in the door and was like, "Hey, I think something's going on." He had been a Marine too. So he was like, "Hey, something's going on." So we scurried down to the library, and they had the TV on, and it was like the second plane hadn't hit the World Trade Center yet. But while we were standing there, it did. And I was like, I immediately called Lima Company, called my unit, was like, "When are we going?" Like, what? Yeah. And they were like, well, we don't know anything yet. So in the end, it was looking like that they weren't going to be going anytime soon. So, and shortly thereafter, I think I was like grading papers or something. I was still doing security as a second job too, but I think the one particular night I was grading papers from teaching, and I saw the grainy green videos of Rangers jumping into Afghanistan. And I at that instant, I was like, I need to go back in. I was like, I can't do this bullshit security job. I can't, I don't really like the teaching thing, and it's only, substitute or whatever. And I'm tired of waiting on the FBI and the marshals and, whoever else I applied to, I don't want to wait on them. I'm going to go back in. So I initially contacted the Marine Corps. I would need an age waiver and a time in service waiver. And
you're old at this point.
Yeah. I was like all of 33 or something at that time. And the Marine Corps said, well, we're not giving waivers right now, or we're not going to give you a waiver. So too bad, so sad. So I did what at that point, I think I had 14 years altogether, 10 active, 4 reserve in the Marine Corps. So I did what any 14-year-old Marine would refuse to do. I called the Army.
All right.
And I said, "Hey, I've got a degree. I'm prior service. I want to go to OCS." And they were like, "Well, you're going to need an age waiver and a time and service waiver, which we're willing to give you. As long as even with the waiver, you still have to be younger than 35. And I was like, "Okay, cool." And they were like, "Yeah, but because of that influx of people more than normal that joined the military after 9/11, it'll be at least a year and a half to get you an OCS slot." And I'm like, "A year and a half? Afghanistan will be over by then." Or, so it seemed at the time. Yeah. Who knew? Yeah. Who knew I was going to be 2 decades off? But so I said, "Okay, well, what if I stay in NCO and stay in the infantry?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, we could have you back on active duty in, a couple weeks, month, maybe 2 months tops." And I was like, "All right." So raised my hand again. One day I was a Marine reservist in Columbus, Ohio, and drove down. And the next day I was an active duty soldier in Columbus, Georgia at Benning. So I ended up, another fun story, another fun fact. So my orders originally were for Kelly Hill, 3rd Brigade, 3rd ID, the only outside of regiment, right. The only
no training stuff there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I get down there to what they used to call the old white elephant buildings, like the old ancient wooden buildings where they had all the offices. In any case, I went there and they're like, "Oh yeah, hey, 3rd Brigade's all full on NCOs. So your orders got changed." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" They were like, "Oh yeah, you're going to Charlie Company 229. I'm like, I don't know what that is. What is it? They're like, "Oh, it's great. It's non-deployable. It's a marksmanship instructor." I'm like, was like, dude, the whole reason I came back on active duty was to deploy. And they're like, well, you could put in was it a 4187, I think.
Yeah,
you know,
I haven't heard that in a long time.
Yeah, you could put in a 4187 in 18 months. I'm like, son of a. So almost immediately I ended up putting in the paperwork, applying to OCS, which is one reason why the Army recruiter I talked to, when he was like, well, where do you want to go? And I was like, well, where's OCS? Because that's my ultimate goal. And he's like, it's at Fort Benning. I was like, okay, well, give me orders to Fort Benning. Then I didn't know anything about the Army, like nothing. The good news is at the time we were still all in what the Marine Corps calls camis, what the Army called BDUs. So all I had to do was take off my U.S. Marines name tape and replace it with a U.S. Army
and
one.
fold your sleeves differently.
Yeah, but even then, like, remember once GWAT started, everybody went sleeves down. I still to this day don't know how to fold sleeves the Army way. But
that was a classic. Remember they had the old.
Yeah,
you guys would.
I used to make fun of that all the time. Yeah. That and their funny covers and
those days are funny. Like people don't get it. It's like the military. The people don't know is when the old uniforms. There's specific days that you would go sleeves down and then sleeves up, and like. It was the favorite day for command sergeant majors for you to catch some person with their sleeves up too early or not down. And it was just like I remember when I was at Bragg, I was on the G4 staff, and I just put a new uniform, and I like walked from like the shower to my office, and I hadn't rolled my sleeves up, and so I'm in my office like getting ready to take off my BD blouse to like roll my sleeves, and like here comes the sergeant major's like, it's sleeves up, Captain Miller, and I'm like. I just like you can't be walking around division. I'm like he's like, I know you can't walk around, and I'm like, I feel like do we have more important shit going on? But yeah, the sleeve thing was a big deal. Yeah,
yep.
So today's world they don't.
No, yeah, no spit shining boots, no sleeves.
All the people in the military have it easy. I'm kidding, but
no, you're right.
Yeah, no. So you head to OCS, but like let's talk about this. So you're showing up, 14-year guy.
Yep.
Marine, you show up to an Army unit. Mm-hmm. What's that initially like?
I thought it was going to be a lot more shocked. But as it turns out, I forget, I was just talking to somebody about this same thing the other day. It's one of the main questions that people ask me too. Like they'll be like, well, which one did you like better, or which is better, or whatever. I'm like, well, I went infantry to infantry. So Charlie 229 was all infantry guys also. And after a short while of being there, so my first platoon sergeant when I got there was very smart. He knew I'd just come from the Marine Corps. So he was like, oh, hey, you're going to the NCO of the month board. And I was like, because in my mind, that was like the squared away guy, or at least a guy that could answer board questions. That's who gets sent to those. And he's like, no, he's like, if I force you to study for a board, it's like a crash course in everything Army. And he was right. Like I went from not knowing anything about the Army to knowing more than people that had been in the Army for years, at least book stuff, like I could regurgitate every regulation. And
it's either pure genius or pure stupidity. They're like,
yeah.
You're calling all kinds of different ranks. You're like, Lance Corporal, we don't have those. I don't know the rank structure.
Yeah. The whole like sergeant thing always threw me off. They're like, because I'm like in the Marine Corps, it's you say out the whole thing, like staff sergeant, gunnery sergeant, not the whole. Everybody's a sergeant.
I still thank God, like the Marine Corps and the Army, we can at least figure it out pretty easy. Like, I still when I have people on for the podcast, they're putting like petty officer second class, and then like the Air Force has got staff sergeant, which is an E5. I'm like, why is it all like? Why is it different? Like, why do we have to be so different? So I still couldn't probably figure out like
the Navy. I got the Air Force. I still can't figure out.
I can't like the Navy. I've got the officer stuff down, but then you start talking about like petty officer second class, all this kind of stuff, and then like I'm like, oh man, like it's just I still do it. If somebody sends me a bio and I'm not really sure, I'll just be like, let's Google like, and then when you look at how things abbreviated, everything's different. So I that is either like pure genius or I could just imagine you went there and just totally fucked it up. And they're like
the rank and rate thing still is crazy in the Navy, where it's like, oh, I'm a boatswain's mate, second class, and I'm like, or whatever. But the Air Force still messes me up.
What the hell does that mean?
It's like senior, upper, lower, master, sergeant. I'm like, what is that? And it's like an E3.
The chevrons on the body. You're like,
come on.
The rank doesn't look right now. It's crazy, but that's the fun.
So my transition to the Army wasn't that bad, and I also quickly realized that there was a whole bunch of guys that were used to be in the Marine Corps that switch over for whatever their reasons may be. But so I wasn't alone, and I stayed infantry. So the numbers switch up a little bit. Marine Corps Rifle Squad, 13 dudes, Army Squad, 9 dudes, so it's like the numbers switch up a little bit, but it's all the same. You still locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. So I didn't have to other than changing the name tape. And the other thing I had to do was, in the old Marine Corps uniforms had the little iron-on, the Marine Corps emblem patch. So I got a Sharpie and colored it in. Of course, it was still BDUs, so it was just like a black smudge of Sharpie marker on the pocket to cover up the Marine Corps emblem.
I think it's always the uniform that I was explaining. I see people do it now because now they're sewn on the what's the Army uniform now? I should think of it multi-cam or whatever it is. You'll see they're back to sewing stuff on, and you'll see them messing up. And there's always that weird thing of when you would change units, if the patch was bigger, it'd be faded. The BDU is and then people are like, why don't you just buy a new one? You're like, dude, you have to fucking as an officer, you have to pay for that. Those you'd have those would turn into the field uniforms, or somebody would have a hard on and be like, because I was in the 2nd Army Division, so it was above your pocket, which was the only unit that did that. No,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was totally crazy. So then we reflagged the 4 IDs. So could, as soon as we did that, you just pull it over, and there's just this dark, and that's the things they fade. You know what I mean? And then better than anybody. Once they broke in, those are the best ones to have. You know? What I mean?
Yeah. The old salty uniform.
Yeah. Then I was just trying to explain to somebody the other day too, how the uniform, the BD was so starched. You would get that, and just you have to break your leg to
I know when I was a drill instructor, we not only would starch it like crazy, but once you'd starch it and iron it, you'd flip it inside out and run a bead. Some people did double face. Some people did double face tape. I used to do Elmer's glue and run a bead of Elmer's glue inside the crease, and then turn it right side out again, and then iron it again. So it was ridiculousness. But so I ended up doing the marksmanship instructor thing while not only were we still in Afghanistan, but then Iraq kicked off again. 3rd ID was one of the spearheads of that. And, I was still that's the unit I was supposed to be in. I should have been with them, but here I am at the Malone ranges at Fort Benning, So, but eventually I got into OCS. And I graduated in November, and I turned 35 the following month. So even with the waiver, I ended up making it under the gun by less than a month. So I was a 35-year-old brand new 2nd lieutenant. Yeah, that was one thing I want to get to, because we've talked about a lot of it's Sean actually text something real quick about it. I think it's as your company commander or something, there's nothing worse than a 35-year-old 2nd lieutenant that shows up who's got 15 years of because to be honest with you, if you're being real, you're holy shit, this person has way more experience than I do. And we're 31 at probably 30, 31 at the time. So what was that like? And then you also have the other thing is showing up to a platoon, right? You're not this 22-year-old pushover. You're a guy who's been in a while. What's that? So showing up to the unit was. It was a little weird. I mean, it's humbling. If you don't have a little bit of humility in you, I don't think you could pull it off. But I understood my role when I showed up to the brand new unit. I wasn't going to be that guy that would immediately, retaliate by saying, I've got 16 and a half years, as an enlisted before.
But would you agree that there's a little bit less pressure on you from the guys though?
Yeah. So there was
accept it a little bit easier, I think, is the way to say it.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for me, my first platoon was so the platoon sergeant that I had got promoted out of the position, so he got promoted to master sergeant. So he was only there for 2 weeks, and then I went through a string of probably 4 maybe different acting platoon sergeants. They gave me another guy, but then he PCS'd, he left. And then they gave me another guy. And I think he had been a lower rank in that company. So they were like, no, we shouldn't make him a, first time platoon sergeant in the same company. So they moved him to a different company. And so I had rotating platoon sergeants, which, and then the other weird thing is I had more platoon sergeant time than any of my platoon sergeants did, back previously, which, I knew that, but I tried when I had a bunch of platoon sergeants that it was like their first day on the job as platoon sergeant, and I wanted to kind of like guide them, which some of them took advice, because I didn't feel like I was an asshole about it. I was trying to be like, hey, maybe you want to try this, guy that's on his first day as platoon sergeant on the job. I mean, they had time as NCOs, but they'd never had been in that position. So,
well, the only reason I laugh with people that don't understand it is like, generally your platoon sergeant's the one who's trying to keep, who's doing that same exact thing to you. They're like,
right.
I think you should do this. So it's a reverse kind of, it's a reverse dynamic that, not only even though you're trying to help, an NCO is not really, they're not going to really be digging it. You know what I mean? They're not going to be doing that. And then you have this tendency to be like, you've done this, like to fall back to what you're comfortable about, because they are distinctly different jobs.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And, I was in long enough to see that, where you'd see some officers that come in that had enlisted time, and they would automatically like just want to like gravitate back to being an enlisted guy, and you'd be like, listen, Bob, like that's not what you're doing anymore. You can't, you're not doing that. That's not your job.
I think Sean told me that once or twice. He's like,
but
hey,
it's I mean, I can understand it. Like, when you're in the middle, when you're younger, I don't think I got it, but it's just a natural.
Yep. I think that probably a really good example of the weirdness of it all is shortly after I got there, we did a company run, or I don't know if it was a battalion run. Might have been a battalion run. Anyway, so we're running in formation. Everybody's supposed to sing cadence, but some guys are shy and don't want to sing it. Some guys just don't know cadence, whatever their reasons. But so our platoon, my brand new platoon, we're running, and like they called out a couple guys, but they weren't very. Anyway, I kind of got frustrated. So me, the brand new second lieutenant, jumped out of formation, and I'm running along the platoon, and I start wailing out some kick-ass running cadence. And everybody's like, is that the lieutenant? Anyway, and it went fine. We finished the run. We get back, and shortly thereafter, I think I don't know, I went some, it went away, and then I came back and to where the offices were, and I heard like a bunch of NCOs like reaming. Somebody was getting their asses chewed out like big time, and I'm like perked my ear up, and then I heard, I don't know who it was, probably the first sergeant. Maybe it wasn't the first sergeant. I think it was one of the platoon sergeants, but he was basically yelling and like, about how embarrassed he was and what in the hell is a lieutenant out there singing cadence for. And I felt bad because I was like, well, I mean, I didn't want anybody to get their ass chewed, but you guys all suck at singing cadence.
But it's also weird. It's one of those weird roles that you're not expected to do. Like, that's not normally the officers doing it.
Right,
so
right.
Yeah, it is true. Like, that's totally how it is. It's like, it's ridiculous. How do you not, Yeah, I could just totally.
Yeah. So I never jumped out and sang cadence again. I'm like, I was like,
you just let them struggle. You're
sorry, buddy. You're on your own on this one, but
I'm trying to keep these E5s out of trouble that are getting in trouble.
So it was, but eventually I finally got a platoon sergeant that stuck. And it was funny because he and I butted heads initially. And then eventually we got along, and just as we were starting to mesh and everything was cool, and I mentioned this earlier, then they were like, okay, we're 6 months out from deployment. You and your group of lieutenants that you came in with are all losing your platoons now. We got a whole brand new batch of lieutenants in. So you guys are going to be XOs or specialty platoons or whatever. Yeah. So
assistant S3s. That's the.
Yeah. So fortunately, I ended up following Sean, as mentioned, over to HHC and took over the mortar as the mortar platoon leader, which is what 6 months later we deployed in that configuration. So, and then off to Iraq we went.
So talk about Iraq. It kind of changed your life a little bit.
Yeah. Yes. In obviously in the 11th month of the deployment. Now our unit, we got hit pretty hard as a unit overall. But my platoon, which had morphed from a mortar platoon doing traditional mortar stuff, because the rules of engagement, we shot a whole bunch of Loom. We lit up a lot of Iraq, but no HE stuff because we couldn't shoot, HE rounds into the town. And so we were doing like traffic control points, and we were doing patrols and route clearances and or not route clearances, but patrolling MSRs and stuff like that. There were a couple far away outposts. There was OP 110. There was the BU split, which means nothing to anybody. But anyway, the guys that I know will know what those are. So we got sent out to those, securing key intersections, main supply routes, and whatnot, which was good. And then eventually they needed a platoon to drive from where we were at in Anbar province all the way pretty much to the other side of Iraq to Balad to get trained up and equipped with the Crows, which is, for those that don't know, it's a remote, common remotely operated weapon station. Anyway, it's basically, instead of having a gunner up in the turret exposed, the gunner sits behind the driver looking at a screen with a joystick. So with a weapon mounted on the roof. Anyway, kind of a cool thing when it works. So my platoon got tagged with doing that. So we drove all the way to Balad, did the training, got equipped with it, drove all the way back. And then we were a maneuver platoon, essentially. At one point we got tasked out to one of the tank platoons, which, some of us at the time called them the twats, the tankers without any tanks, because they, tanks can't really get into a lot of places, so they gave them a lot of Humvees. But and then they moved us out to work with Iraqi police out in another town that was probably about a good 45 minutes or more away from where the rest of the battalion was. So got to do a lot of cool stuff, and all was fine and dandy. We had some close calls, some small arms fire, several IEDs that were like near misses. To that point, none of my guys in my platoon had been wounded. So I was like, man, I must be really good at this, because, obviously I'm joking. It's all chance for the most part, with some training mixed in there. So we were fine. And then the 11th month of deployment, which I think we had just found out that we were getting extended, because we were one of the early. It was on the surge, the 2007 surge. We were part of that big surge. But anyway, and then we went out and, good story with that one. So we're there 11 months. We'd had near misses, close calls, whatever, IEDs, small arms fire, rockets, a lot of rockets. But anyway, me and all my guys were fine. Anyway, so we, I think what they call them, like a contact team came on to the FOB. And I got word, they're like, hey, this contact team has additional or like upgraded armor that they're going to put on the vehicles. But I already knew we were working up a mission where we were going to go out to the west. They were doing a raid, and we were going to be like a blocking position to the west in case any of the dudes squirted out of the objective and, on dirt bikes or whatever and tried to escape through the desert. We were going to intercept them. So I found out we were supposed to get the armor kits. And I was like, we don't really have time for that. We're getting ready for this mission. But my platoon sergeant was like, no, sir, we probably should get the armor. I mean, they got it. And I'm like, dude, I don't have time for that. It's going to take forever. I was like, they're probably going to be out of it by the time they get to the mortar platoon anyway. We're like the last guys to get everything. He's like, no, we really should do it. And so I was like, all right, fine, whatever. It's going to waste my time. We got mission planning to do. Anyway, so that was on December 6th. We got the armor put on the next morning, December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day. We pushed out for that mission. We turn off the MSR, start getting, spreading out to get in our blocking position places, and rolled over a pressure plate IED, kaboom. So everything one of the extra pieces of armor was up underneath the wheel well, I was told. Everything forward of that piece of extra armor or updated armor, whatever it was, poof. Everything behind it was me. So obviously it's a game of inches or less. So if it would have gone off a fraction of a second later, I would have been vaporized. If it would have gone off even later than that, it would have, got the guy that was sitting behind me, all different scenarios, but it was crazy. I just remember everything going quiet, like no sound. I remember the front of and everything moved in slow motion. The front of the vehicle lifted up, and then it slow motion came back down. And then I think I got knocked out. I don't know what I whacked my head on or whatever, but I was out, but it wasn't for very long. And then I remember the guys at the door, my Humvee, kind of trying to get the door open, but it was messed up in the explosion. So they couldn't get me out the door. So then somebody was like, hey, we'll pull him out the turret. So I'm and I realized at the time that like something was wrong because my leg wasn't working right. But initially when I regained consciousness, let me back up a smidge, ears were ringing or whatever. I look across the radio stack and I see the driver whose nickname was Bird. And I'm like, Bird, you good? And he was like, I couldn't hear him yet, but I think he gave me a thumbs up or whatever. And then I continued to turn around and I looked for the legs of our gunner, which my vehicle, we didn't have the Crow's system on. So we had a traditional gunner. So his name was Harmon. I looked for Harmon's legs. I didn't see him. So I started yelling, where's Harmon? Where's Harmon? And then I started being able to hear again. And somebody said, oh, he's okay. He's over there laying in the dirt, whatever. He's fine. And then we had one guy behind me, Danny Lowry. And by that time I could hear again. I'm like, Danny, you good? And he's like, yeah, how about you? And I was like, I don't know. My leg doesn't work. And I remember I refused to look at my leg because I knew something, it felt weird, but I didn't want to look down and not see a leg. So I was just kind of like, okay, it seems to all be there. I'm not feeling, okay, I'm good. I just knew something was off. So, and then they tried to, I crawled over the radios, tried to climb up through the turret. I got about halfway. Hands reached down, they grabbed me, they pulled me, and then I passed out again. And apparently later on I had a gash on my face and I found out it was because, I was, dead weight. I passed out, they dropped me and I face planted into I think we had a 240 up in the turret. But anyway, they eventually got
shot to the tooth of the M203. That might have been what it's something.
Yeah. I think I sent you a picture of my vehicle, but so yeah, they got me out, got me on the ground. I remember I regained consciousness on the ground. I remember our doc had shears. He was about to cut my laces off my boot. And I'm like, Doc, stop it. I was like, that's my last good pair of laces I have. Just untie it. So I think he untied it. And then at some point he was like, how's the pain? Do you need morphine? And I was like, no, I'm good. And, I think I was still riding high on adrenaline and whatnot. But then the pain hit and then it hurt like hell. And I'm like, Doc, morphine. Yeah. They ground evac me from there to one of our little bases downtown. And all I really remember there is I wanted a cup of coffee and I wanted to bum a dip from somebody. And the doc said, no, you can't have either because you have morphine. And I was like, well, this is bullshit. But, and then they put me on a helicopter and they air medevac me and Harmon, who was my gunner, medevaced us up to Al-Assad. A couple funny things there. I remember they threw me like a hospital gown at one point and they were like, yeah, you'll need to put that on. And I think I had a second dose, maybe of morphine. I don't remember. But I think they meant like put it on later once they took me to a room, but I was in like the big open bay at the time. So I stripped down naked in front of everybody and they were like, we didn't mean now. So I put on the gown. They eventually, then there were guys from the unit that were up there and Harmon had already been cleared. I think he had a concussion and some scrapes and shit. So they were like, hey, we're going to take Harmon back. And I'm like, well, hold on, let me get my uniform back on. And the doc's like, nah, you're done, Lieutenant. I'm like, what do you mean I'm done? I was like, I got all my parts. I was like, everything's cool. And they're like, no, you don't understand. And I'm like, look, man, I'm fine. Let me go back with my guys, again, morphine and whatever talking. But I was like, this is bullshit. I didn't lose a leg. I can see, I can hear, I can feel. I was like, I'm good to go. And they were like, yeah, no. So the guys left. They put me in a room. There was a wheelchair in the room. So I thought it was a good idea that I crawl out of the bed and get the wheelchair. And I rolled myself down the hall. I saw an office, rolled in. There was some Navy person there. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to use one of your computers. So I rolled myself over into some random office and I emailed my wife. So I beat the whole, what do they call it? Like, when you get wounded, and there's like official channels, the way the phone calls are supposed to go. I beat it all and called my wife and was like, yeah, I got a little bit blown up. I'm fine, but whatever. From there, they put me on another helicopter, flew me up to Balad. And then in Balad, they did x-rays, MRIs, whatever, ran a bunch of tests. And weird thing there is there was a big room. They were like, hey, just go back in this room. But I remember going back in the room and a couple things. One is there were these ugly, really ugly knit caps that I guess some old grannies back in the States knitted and sent to the troops. So hideous thing, but I put it on my head. And then I was going around looking at all the other wounded dudes in the room. And I remember I spent, I don't know, it was a good while. It was probably 45 minutes. I saw one kid that was hooked up to all kinds of stuff. He was fucked up bad. And I talked to him for like 45 minutes, maybe an hour. I don't know. He couldn't talk. He was unconscious, hooked up to all kinds of machines. But I remember, distinctly carrying on a full 45-minute, hour-long conversation with the kid, which is a weird thing that I remember. And then they came and found me, and they're like, "Hey, it's time to go." I'm like, "Time to go where? Am I going back to my unit?" They're like, "No." So they put me on a gurney and they start rolling me out. And the kid that was rolling me out was like, "Oh, don't worry, Lieutenant. You'll be back stateside in no time at all." I'm like, "Wait, what?" He's like, "Yeah, you're going to Walter Reed." I'm like, "But my family's in Germany. I'm stationed in Germany." And they're like, "Oh, really?" I'm like, "Yeah, really." So they turned me around, rolled me back in, and I got on the next, and they put me on the next plane for Landstuhl in Germany. So
my bad.
Yeah. And the only thing on the flight I remember is the morphine had started to wear off again, and it hurt like hell. And they made us chocolate chip cookies on the flight. I don't know if I imagined that or if it was some like
I never heard that before. There might be
like, I mean, it was an Air Force plane. So, but
that's the story that you're sticking to.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know if it was some like drug induced hallucination or what, but I remember they made chocolate chip cookies and they were really good. And then they got us back to Germany and they put us on a bus, one of the old Bluebird school buses modded out to carry litters. And we got to the gate and they came on the bus and we're checking IDs. And they got to me and I handed my ID and they were like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we can't let you in." And I was like, "Ha, you're funny." He's like, no, your ID card expired like 3 days ago. I'm like, "Oh, well, shit." So I had to get signed in my gurney. I had to get signed on to the naval or the Army hospital in Landstuhl. I'd get signed on as a guest. And then while I was in the naval hospital, or I keep saying naval hospital, while I was in the hospital, they made me get a new ID card, but I'm wearing a hospital gown. So for a while I had a military ID card wearing a really ugly, like floral design hospital gown. So, but yeah, initially they were like, "Yeah, you're going to get med sept." And they were like, "Yeah, you're not going to be able to run again. We're going to have to fuse the joints in your ankle. You fractured your calcaneus, among other things. So yeah, you're once we fuse those joints, you're not going to be able to flex or extend. So, you're going to have to get medically separated." And I was like, "Nah." I was like, "Do I have to have the surgery?" And they're like, "Well, no, you can turn it down, but that'll be stupid." And I'm like, "Okay, well, that's what I'm going to do then." So I turned down the initial surgery and, they never fused the joints.
So how much time are you talking for people to listen? I mean, from, hitting the pressure plate to being in Germany, how long are you talking about?
Oh, I was on expedited 36 hours, 36 hours from Kaboom to Germany. So not long at all, really.
Yeah, that's one of the things I just want to. I mean, I figured that's the time frame because that's one of the things that's changed with the GWAT and how the changes. Like, from being on the battlefield, you could be in Walter Reed or Landstuhl pretty quick, and there's not a lot of time to process what's really like what's happened to you. Like you said, you're imagining getting chocolate chip cookies. Like,
I may not have imagined.
No, I'm
that.
joking. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean just that whole and I don't bring it up because there's a quickness of like there's not a lot of time to process. Like you're going from being a platoon leader to everything's fine to all of a sudden, oh my gosh, where's everybody? And I think the main thing that a lot of people I talk to that have been wounded is most of the time you're alone, right? You're not around anybody from your unit really. Yep. You're by yourself.
Yep.
Like what was that feeling of like that, the intensity of like, are we still too?
It was definitely like when we were still in Al-Assad and the guys were taking Harmon back to where we were at, back to our base. Yeah, that was pretty well. Again, it was a mix of like heartbreak and anger.
Yeah,
like I kind of remember yelling at the Navy doctor because that's who was running Al-Assad at the time. It was like Navy and Marines, so it was all Navy doctors. So I remember yelling at him because he wouldn't let me go with my guys. And that that's portrayed in movies, but it's legit. Like every dude I ever knew that was still able to speak that was wounded and getting medevac didn't want to go.
Yeah.
Wanted to stay with their guys, wanted to come back to their guys as soon as they could. They show it in Band of Brothers. The guys get wounded and then they like escape from the hospital and go back to the unit. Well, yeah. So
I've done a reading. I think it's interesting if you look at even the Vietnam days. There was these guys were coming back in ships. It was a longer time. They were at least with guys a little. You could like process what was going on with other guys.
Yeah.
Right. To kind of deal with it and in this situation, like you said, you could be that one off that like everybody else is just going to go out about their normal day. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're 36 hours later, you're laying in a bed, your family's there. Like it's just a different.
Yeah. And fortunately, I was the only one of my guys that got wounded, which is I'll take that all day, every day. But again, like you said, I was all by myself. I went from being with my guys day in and day out for 11 months or whatever it was at the time, to all of a sudden I'm around a bunch of strangers and I'm doing a bunch of shit that I don't want to be doing and being told I'll never run again and I'm going to get kicked out of the army or medically discharged from the army. And so, yeah, a lot of stuff real quick. In the end, I turned down the surgery. Now I've had some since then, but several, but I was able to stay in. I did physical therapy like a madman for like 11 months. Once I was able to, and I was back in Germany at our base, I think they made up a position. I was like the rear detachment XO, which I don't even think that's a real thing, but that's what they called me. It even went on my, I got evaluated my final OER. It was like company executive officer, but it was for rear D. So I think they just like made up a position for me to do. So I'd crutch and hobble in there. And when I was able to, and did rear D stuff, basically prepared to bring the unit back in because they were still there. I got hit in December. They came back mid-February. So
you have the physical thing you go through, like what is going on mentally. You're still, you like you said, especially you've had a little bit longer career than a normal lieutenant at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've transitioned out once, you've went back in. Now they're telling you that what you want to do, you can't do it.
I was going to fight it because
Yeah.
I was like, I think I told him, I was like, no, there's still stuff I want to do. Like, I'm not going to take it. Like, I'll fight getting separated. I still want to be a company commander. That was when I got commissioned, knowing how old I was and how much time I had left.
Yeah.
That was the two things I wanted to do. I wanted to, and again, I wanted to do it in combat, preferably, be a PL in combat and be a company commander in combat. I was like, I still want to do things. And they were like, okay, cool. That's your call. Like, nobody tried to argue or fight it. They said it's all based off of, down the road, if you're able to obviously, take PT test and all that stuff. So I worked hard, did physical therapy. The other weird thing was, I didn't know it at the time, but my promotion I didn't actually get pinned. Actually, when I got promoted to captain, it was our battalion XO. I think I was like, hey, sir, you guys ever going to, let us get promoted? And I think he went to a desk, opened up a desk drawer, found some captain bars and threw them to me. And was like, there you go. You're a captain now. That was how I got promoted to captain. But anyway, I found out my date of rank or whatever, my promotion date was actually January. So it was only a month after I got blown up that I was technically, on paper anyway, I was a captain. And our base was shutting down. The whole unit, this was first Armor Division, was moving from Germany to Bliss. So I was doing the rear D XO thing. And then when everybody got back, I was doing XO stuff, and everybody was pretty much, there was no training going on. So during all that time, I was like really hitting the physical therapy hard. And then from there, I was going to go to Captain's Career Course, which I ended up picking, going to Knox because it was closer to Ohio. So I thought after we've been in Germany for the last 3 years, I should probably get my, get family close to family. So I ended up doing that. So, and they were cool with it too. And it was cool because one of our company commanders, one of the company commanders in 136, had gotten wounded, and he was actually on the cadre there at Captain's Career Course. So I had a familiar face there. And then several of the guys from my unit in Germany, we all went at the same time. So So that was kind of cool. I was around familiar faces, and I was able to, more importantly, they weren't like, pushing PT necessarily really hard, which I hear is maybe different if you go to the career course at Benning.
Yeah.
I hear like in their spare time, they're doing like combatives and stuff at Knox at the time. In our spare time for like group PT, we were playing, Frisbee football.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I did a lot more physical therapy. So basically for 11 months from the time I was able to, when I was still in Germany, all the way through the captain's career course until just before I left there and I graduated and left, I was doing physical therapy. By the end of that time, which was like a year, basically, since I got blown up, I was out there able to do PT tests and bust out like a pretty good score. And then I became a company commander.
So one thing about that, and I want to kind of move on because you've done some other things I want to hit. We're cruising along, which I love. But so the people that aren't listening, like when I hear you say it, like I'm wounded, you get the surgery, you get kicked out of the, you get medically discharged in the Army. Like a lot of people would be like, well, that seems like the right thing to do. Like what, like for someone who's not listening to understand, like what in your mind was like, no, I'm not going to do that, because that's one thing I think a lot of civilians may not understand is like at that time is like, that's an easy out. So medically discharged could mean, medical retirement. It could mean some good things, but like what made you say like, hey, basically, piss off Army. I'm going to prove you wrong. Like what was,
yeah,
because that doesn't seem rational to a lot of people.
I suppose
right?
so. Never really thought about it like that.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, I'm stubborn, number one. And then it was, like I said, I still felt like I could contribute at that time. That was 2007 time frame.
Mm-hmm.
The surge had just started in Iraq. I knew, everybody I knew was going to have to go back. And not to be like snooty about it, but I felt like I was really good at what I did. And if I could stay in and keep some guys alive or keep some guys from getting hurt, because I mean, the war is still going on, just because I hit a speed bump or whatever. I felt like I could still contribute, and I wanted to, and you build that bond with the guys. And you don't want them going without you. It's like, I mean, I know that a lot of sports analogies or whatever in the military, but it's like, if you were with your team through the playoffs and you get hurt and they go to the Super Bowl, you don't want to sit on the sidelines during the Super Bowl. You want to be there playing. It's kind of a weird comparison, but
no, I get it. Cause I think like I've heard a lot of people say like, you're going to go out on your own terms, right? You're going to like, whatever they're telling you, like, I'm going to ride it, like ride or die with it. Like I'm going to try to see what we can do, because it's almost like a professional athlete too, where you see this professional athlete that has like this major debilitating injury, and then like they work through it and they come back. Like some will come back, but some will come back just shortly. But but they come back and they go out on their own terms. Like they've done everything they can to, because some people will say like, yeah, that's easy out. Like you could have infused, it could have been done. Like you're out of the military, you know, and not to make it wrong, but a lot of people do that. I think there's people. I've talked to many people that have been that course of action. Like I had a friend of mine that was talking about, getting his leg cut off so he can go back to, kicking indoors. And that was like when I think about that, I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? But, it's at each individual person at the time that I'm going to, I'm not accepting what happened.
I mean, the wars, whatever you want to call it, were still going on. I still had lots of guys that I knew that were still involved. And I felt like it wasn't debilitating enough, and as it turned out, that was true. Now, when it first happened, I didn't really know. I'd never been blown up before. So I was like, shit, I don't know what's going to happen. They could be right. I might have to get out. But as I progressed through the physical therapy, and I wish I could remember, the lady's name in Germany, whoever the physical therapy lady was that I had in Germany, she was awesome, because she that was the hardest time. It was short right after getting blown up and whatever. And so she got me going down the right path. And I mean, I just had unfinished business. Didn't want to leave the guys. Probably you hit that nail on the head with wanted to go. If I was going to go out, it was going to be on my own terms. And and I'm kind of old school too,
hard-headed always helps. So, but like,
I'm from that old school generation where it was like, just rub dirt in it and carry on, suck it up.
There was a serious, I think a lot of it too comes down to you were, you knee deep in it. The war didn't look like at the time was like at all going to end anytime soon. Mm-hmm. Your brothers and sisters, they're out there doing that. And then there's that part of like, like you were watching and the GWAT, one of the crazy things about it is like people, you see it. I think we notice it more, but there's a lot of dudes that like lost, like one of the guys with Lieutenant with Dave Roselle, I think he was the first, blown knee amputee that went back on active duty and commanded. Like, these guys, it's like, so there's the technologies out there. So it's like, it's just I'm not done yet. Right.
Yeah.
And there's service still to be done. Right.
Yeah.
So
in layman's terms, I wasn't going to bitch out just cause I don't
call that bitching out, but I know what you're saying. Yeah. 100% with you. Yeah. So, I like to move on because I think I do want to talk about the second transition out. I think, so, you went on, like, for people that to know, went on and commanded, did the fun OCT job. I had that job as well. That wasn't my favorite one. We could talk about 2 hours about that one, but
I do want to say, so I ended up taking command of a company out of Fort Drum. We did a deployment to Afghanistan. It was, and I want to bring it up, it was for me, out of my deployments and all my years in it, it was the roughest because it was the first time in my however many years I had in it by that point where I actually lost my guys, and we lost several through. First 6 months we were cruising. We were like, oh, we're out in the community and we're doing all, village assessments, and they need a well and they need a school. And that was cool up until the IED started going off. Yeah. And then the very first day we lost folks. We did have a couple guys wounded from IEDs, but then on June 1st in 2009, we lost in 2 different incidents. We ended up losing 4 guys killed and then some wounded. And that was the first time that had ever happened to me. Like, even when I was talking about it in Iraq, all my guys came home. Like, I was the only one that got wounded enough to get medevaced out. And even, Liberia, all the way back to Liberia and all those other ones, like, I never lost any of my guys until I was a company commander. And then I lost 9 of my guys in a 6-month period, the second 6 month, the second half of the deployment. So that really, I'd never had that experience before. And I didn't realize how much it would affect you, not only then, but years down the road.
Does it still affect you today?
Oh yeah. Think about it all the time, almost every day. Still talk to a lot of the guys. I told you I didn't have a phone for like 5 years. So no social media ever up until like 2 years ago. I finally got on, although it's for like middle-aged women, I got on Facebook. But anyway, it was cool because I was able to reconnect with a lot of the guys. So yeah. And as much as it pains me, it also kind of makes me happy that some of those guys that are struggling, especially from the Afghanistan deployment, they feel that they can still call me, for advice or whatever, or just to like talk them down if they're going through some shit. But so that was, I talked to guys from all eras of my career, but I think that's the one that deployment has had generally speaking, the most guys that have had issues with coming back from that, losing guys. We had, like I said, 9 guys killed and probably at least a platoon's worth wounded over the course of that deployment. So, and again, for me, it was the first time I actually personally lost my guys. I understand I couldn't be everywhere at once if that would have even mattered, but to a certain extent, I don't know if I'd call it survivor's guilt, but that's kind of what goes through my head is like, if I would have gone out with that platoon on that particular day, maybe I could have been like zig, don't zag or something, but I know that's a silly path to go down, but it's still there.
I always think about it. So I want to ask you this question too, because I always thought it was more important to me to bring everyone home than it was to bring myself home.
Oh yeah.
Right. So was it harder for you to lose those guys than to be wounded yourself?
Oh,
like explain that to someone. Why would you explain that if you had to put into words, if you can?
I think as an individual, especially as a leader, you go into it expecting not to, I don't want to say sacrifice yourself, but if by you being sacrificed, your guys live, that's everybody, that's perfect. That's perfectly okay. Like, I think it's you take on that responsibility when you become a leader, that the expectation is that you, if it came down to it, that you would give yourself up for your guys. I mean, that's the point of you being there, the point of you being in that leadership position and having the experience and the knowledge and the whatever, is it's kind of like a father figure thing, but it's way more than a father figure, coach, but it's more than that. It's, yeah, I mean, I guess it's easy to kind of brush past it when you're talking to other people that know.
Yeah, I had it. It was like, I wouldn't know if I made a mistake that cost me my life, right? Like I wouldn't know because I'd be gone, right? But
right.
But I always had a fear that I was going to I was going to make the right decision or do something that was going to cost somebody else their life, and have that like that survivor guilt, the feeling of like,
oh yeah, that would be,
I didn't do the right thing, and have that on my, you know, that weight on me a lot. You know what I mean? I could kind of accept that. Yeah. If I fuck up, like, I remember it starting like we pre going to 9, like when I became a jump master, like I would always say to myself, like, you know, I'm not a prayer, but I would always, I don't pray a lot, but like, I would always just be like, you know, don't let me do anything that's going to get anybody hurt. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I could always accept me doing something stupid, get myself hurt, but like that responsibility of other people, I was like, man, that's just, that always made me feel, you know, that gave me the drive to like, make sure you're like, cross your T's, dotting your I's, but it's also, it was a lot of stress on that like, yeah, because you can't control what you can't control, and you're going to make mistakes, but and it's not, I don't think it's also, you know, a trait that's only on officers or NCOs. I think a lot of everybody feels that way. That's I think when you start talking about survivor guilt, it's all these things, is I think a lot of the times most of the people would be like, it's just a weird way of saying it, but like, I'd rather something happen to me than somebody else, because I don't know, you know, what. Yeah, I'm not going to know, but I just, you know, when you look and you see that, it's always
that'd be the worst time, if you make a mistake that costs somebody else, that has to be like the ultimate worst feeling. But you don't really care about, like, every day in Iraq. I mean, maybe I'm weird, but I used to try to explain it to people, and they just thought I was off my rocker. But I'm like, you know, every day, to be a successful leader, every day when you go outside the wire, you kind of go out with the expectation that you're not going to come back. But you don't care about that. You care about all your guys coming back. You know, like, you could give a shit if you don't make it, but if you lose one of them, that would be the ultimate bad thing. And you're right. It doesn't necessarily have to do with rank or leaders. You know, people sometimes do the, you know, oh, thank you for your service. And in my cynical brain, you know, well, that whole thing is another topic that kind of weirds me out. Like, I never really know what to say, but the cynical part of my brain at times, not out loud, but has said, well, thanks, but I don't do it for you. I did it for them. Yeah. We do it for each other. Like, you know, and people ask about the politics involved in being deployed in the military. I'm like, you know what? We really don't really think about it. Like, nobody talks about it because it doesn't matter. You're not there for the politics.
I think the only politic part of it is like, when the fuck are we going home? But
like you're there for the guys. You're not there for the politics. You're not there. Yeah. Like, you could give a shit who's saying what in Congress or whatever. You're just there for the guys. And so you don't want to let them down. You want to be there for them. So let me ask this question. Do you at all blame yourself for those guys not making it home, or guys who were wounded? No, I mean, I think about it every once in a while. I'm like, you kind of run it back in your head, and you're like, okay, what was I doing that day when that particular incident happened? And if I would have, you know, I do what if it on occasion. I don't know if I'd say I blame myself, but I do what if it, and, you know, well, what if I would have been, you know, out there, and, you know, I could have been like, no, you know, don't go that way, go this way, or hey, you know, slow down, or, you know, dismount and clear this area, you know, that, you know, but again, you can play that game forever and never win. So I wouldn't say I get too wrapped up in it, but it does cross my mind every once in a while.
We'll give yourself some grace, brother.
Definitely.
When it comes up, just remember, not your fault.
Yeah. Yeah. Still sucks though.
No, I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like a lot of us take, a lot of people take that on as being their fault and beat themselves up about it, but
Yeah.
have grace on yourself. So let's talk about that next transition. So you had all these things. So you figured out transition. You're getting ready to come out. You've like,
yep.
You went through the rough times when you're 28. Now you come out.
Yeah. So this time
about 10 years ago, and now.
Yeah. So this time I thought I had it all figured out. So I, left drum, did the OC thing, did recruiting command, which got me back to Ohio. That's pretty much the only positive thing that came from that. Yeah. But I did get promoted finally, my last promotion. Had a school seat at Leavenworth. What do you call it? Like in person, in class, whatever.
CGSC.
Yeah. So I was supposed to go there and go to school and then do like major things for a while. But at that point I was kind of like, you know what? I think I'm done. Like I'm coming up on 28 years of this, and, and again, not to like be some self-proclaimed, badass, but, after you've done combat and at that time it was a weird time in the Army too, but when you come back and people are more concerned with, what font you're using on your header for your PowerPoint slides, and
it's important stuff, man,
and having to go to the 17th iteration of EO training or whatever. And anyway, you start spending time doing a bunch of stuff that in your mind, you're like, none of this shit matters. We're war fighters, so anyway, I think it was, without carrying on too much, it was time to get out. But I thought I had it all figured out this time. I'm like, okay, I'm retiring with all this time in as a major. I was able to do school. I finished my master's before I retired. I'm going to get out and people are going to be beating down my door. And which is funny because when I got out the first time, that's what I thought too. I'm a badass Marine. I've done all this cool guy stuff. People are going to be beating down my door. You think I would have learned my lesson after the first time, but
I'm kidding.
No, I didn't. So turns out it was the same thing. I ended up getting out, and I think it took me almost a year before I got a job. I'd gotten a few interviews, but it was always kind of came down to, well, like, hey, your resume looks great, but you don't have specific experience in, park management. You have general military management experience, but you've never worked in the, park system, or you've never worked you've never been a facility. What do they call it? Facilities management. You've never done whatever it was. Anyway, I did a couple interviews and none of them panned out. And the one that finally did was the one that I was kind of like iffy about doing anyway, but I applied because, didn't have anything else coming my way. And I became a training manager with TSA. So by all accounts on paper, that job was, again, it took me almost a year, but it was good. It was like a GS-12 equivalent. At the time I lived in Gahanna, so I was like 10, 15-minute commute to the airport to work. Federal job, pay, benefits, whatever. Unfortunately, after about 6 months, I wanted to gouge my own eyes out because I was sitting in a cubicle with a suit and tie and was like, well, it was my first, I used to call it my first big boy job because, I'd worn camouflage my whole life until that job, in a cubicle in the bowels of the airport, going to meetings, doing PowerPoint slides. I thought I was ready to do that. But it turns out I wasn't. So I stayed another like 6 months after that epiphany that I hated it. But that was basically just enough time to go into apply to Triple Canopy and get accepted into their training. And so wouldn't you know it, and it was funny because all my guys, when I was going to retire, they're like, oh, you'll be out doing contracting with, Blackwater or whatever. I'm like, nah, man, I'm done with all that, going to other countries and people trying to shoot me and whatever. And yeah, so that lasted about a year. And then I ended up doing the contracting thing, which was cool. One really cool thing is when I was on the bus to go to the training in North Carolina, I heard somebody say, Captain Mac. I turned around and it was one of my squad leaders from our Afghanistan deployment. He's like, what are you doing on the bus? He's like, are you going into like a management position? I'm like, no, I'm just coming to be a trigger puller like you. And they're like, what are you, stupid? I'm like, I don't know, probably, but I was like, but you know,
Yes. No, good.
I was like, I still got some left in the tank, so I'm gonna go do this. So I ended up doing that for a year in Baghdad, working contracting for the State Department. So it was pretty cool. I was back around like-minded individuals,
Yeah.
a bunch of, although this time we all had beards, and most of the guys had more tattoos than they had when I knew them in the military. So yeah, back around like-minded individuals, body armor, guns, ammo, rocking around the streets of Baghdad. So it was cool, paid well. Really the biggest thing that brought me back was my son was getting ready to start his senior year of high school. And I kind of was like, I felt like I needed to be back there with him to kind of guide him in the right direction. So he just finished his second year of law school. So he's
Awesome.
Apparently that plan worked. Plus I missed my dogs and my cats. So
Your special chicken.
no, I didn't have the chickens yet, but yeah.
But let's talk about that real quick. Like, so the transition, for a lot of us is never smooth. So if you had any advice to anybody that's getting out, like what would you
don't?
I mean, that would be a good one, but that's not an option. Like, I mean,
I don't know. I really don't know what the right answer is. I thought I did. I checked all the blocks and rank, experience, education, like, and I'm talking specifically for like infantry and combat arms guys.
Yeah.
If you have like a normal people job in the military, transition, I'm sure is a lot smoother because you
it can be, but it's not. I mean, I think a lot of it is like, I mean, not to cut you off, but like, I think, if I would tell, I thought about this a lot is like, especially because it ties into all mental health, right? Like you think you got it all together, you figured it out, like reach out to fucking people that have been out for a while, like use these contacts you have, ask what's going on. And I think the other thing is just got to be flexible to, the whole, don't you know who I am? That shit goes away pretty quick.
Oh,
like, you gotta understand. Yeah. They know who you are and they don't really care. Right. So, but it's the big thing is I just think to be patient now. I think it's getting better. Like, even when you got out 10 years ago, it's changed, right? I think they're starting to see there's a lot more value, I think, with veterans that are getting out. They start to see to do that. There's a lot more services now to kind of transition what you're doing before to, what I was doing before. How does that transition in today's world? And just kind of, be flexible, I think is a good,
flexible
and open
and patient, but saying
and
be
humble.
patient isn't always available because some of these guys, the guys that have families or whatever, they got bills to pay. They don't have time to be patient. So they end up, and I think that leads me personally, I think that leads to a lot of the issues that come, the mental health issues is like we touched on before, is you go from you're responsible for so much and then one day, and then the next day you're out. And to a lot of people, you have no skills that they want, or at least that's what they think, and trying to translate that. There's some depression and some frustration and whatever. And, you still want to be able to care for your family and care for yourself, but it seems like a lot of us can't get a break, and I think a lot of that sends people down a bad path where, they start getting more into, different substances, and then the depression builds up and you yearn for, like, even as prepared as I thought I was, I remember saying, telling people, I was like, I feel like I'm in like bizarro world. Like everything that made sense to me for my whole military career is not, like, nothing out here makes sense. Like the people that should be, getting jobs aren't, and the whatever. It just seemed like everything was upside down and backwards. And that was for me, who had checked some of those blocks. So imagine just, a younger guy who did nothing but the infantry, has no schooling. They're now, yeah, sure, you can go get some crap job, but nobody wants to, that.
Yeah, but I think it takes a start in to get in. I think a lot for me was like that whole, like, I asked the question, like, what was the hardest part of getting out? Like, losing my friends, losing my,
definitely.
my my job or lose my identity. Like, and I said that, you know, it was big for me, it was identity until just like recently, the past 2 years, like you always tie into the identity, what used to be, right? It's not what you always going to be. Like that was a part of who I am, right? Like it's not my identity anymore. Like I don't walk around saying I'm a former Army officer. Like, you know, that's, you know, unless it comes up in, you know, a conversation. So like that, you know, tying it into that, that's very, you know, hard to say like I was this, I was that. You know, all of us, like, you know, before that, we weren't what we were before. We weren't in the military. So it's like just being flexible and being able to like understand that like it's a job. Like being in the military is a job. It's not deep down inside it is. It really, I mean, it really is.
Ultimately,
right?
yes, but
I mean, I'm talking about with transition. I'm just saying that that's one thing you kind of got to break that whole fairy tale or I don't know how you want to say it, but this whole like what like this it's a job, right? And you got to find another job, and it may not be the job that you want, but you got to keep pushing towards it, and you know, getting those checks, you know, check those boxes, because you know, even you know, I've seen, you know, lieutenant colonels get out of colonels that like they struggle because like I've done all these things, but like but you don't like when's the last time you had to manage, you know, a P&L? Like they're like, well, I did it in school, but like no, when have you like, you know, when have you done these things? You just got to kind of check the, you know.
And I think it's hard to, you know, the longer you were in, because by the time you leave the military at a certain rank and you have all this responsibility, and then you get out and you're like, oh, I can totally have that same amount of responsibility on the outside or even more, but then you don't really get the opportunity because, you know, those people on the outside are have been in that field, whatever it is, you know, for the same amount of time you've been in the military, they've been doing it on the civilian side.
Exactly.
So you're like, you gotta be flexible. I like to see there's like several of my former guys who have gone in like complete different directions. Like they're doing stuff that like, I'm like, I would never, you know, a bunch of infantry dudes wouldn't be sitting in the back of a Bradley being like, oh, when I get out, I'm going to go do this. So I think that's kind of cool and pretty ballsy of them to do that. Like, thinking outside the box, you know, not pigeonholing your, like, you know, a lot of people, I mean, I'm kind of a hypocrite, you know, because
I don't think it's being a hypocrite.
Because I work private security now. So, you know, not too far of a jump from,
but I don't think it's being a hypocrite. It's being like, I mean, we're creatures of habit. Like what's comfort is comfort. But like, I mean, you know, when the comfort is not, you know, paying the bills and it's not do what we need to do. Yeah, we need to pivot. And I still have it that, you know, we all pivoted to go in the military. None of us were made to go in the military. Like that's a very drastic change. Yeah. Like there's dudes, like some people that are like, if you hear their story, like, I didn't do this. And like, I'm not around the military. All of a sudden, you know, you find out they're, you know, they're at the dev group, or they pivoted to something crazy. So to get out and be like, oh, I got to be a cop, I got to be this. I mean, you can do all kinds of stuff. And I had that happen to me. Like it took a while, but like all they tell you is when you get out of the military is like, you're going to be a leader. Like you're a leader, you're a leader, you're a leader. Well, you know what? I was fucking sick and tired of leading people, because to be honest with you, half the time, like I got in trouble or like the shit was because somebody else wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing. Yeah. So like, I want to get in sales, and people are like, oh, you don't know shit about sales. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you just got to pivot. You got to change and move around. And I think, you know, but the big thing is identity, right? Like, I think, you know, we tie into that, like, that's who we are. That's who we'll always be. It's a part of me. It's an important part of who I was and am, but I, you know, I struggled with that for a long time, right? Like when people talk to me now about what I do, I like, it's my job. Like, I mean, I don't like, I don't like to talk about watching paint dry. That's what I really do for a career. Like, I mean, but you know, I'm proud of that. But you know, when you talk to somebody, like someone's, I'm in private security, like I'm past those days of being like, that's great for you, but it's not in my cards, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, definitely. But at the same time, I think maintaining that connection is vital for a lot of the guys. Like that's the only support a lot of the guys have, is that military thing. So I agree. Career wise, you got to be able to pivot, but and career wise and to a certain extent personality wise, like I always have to laugh at the dude that was like a drill instructor in the 80s, and he still walks around and talks and I'm like, dude, come on, it's been like 60 years since you were on Paris Island. Like, get over the voice. But that's our identity. That's what we tied into, and I don't fault him. It's just the way it is. I mean, like, I mean, like I don't fault him. I just I chuckle a little bit. Sean just posted your formal company creator just posted. He said, "I know I work as a data analyst he'll pull it up, supporting a government contractor running call centers in the student loan industry." ... So like, it's you just gotta. It's a job, right? You just gotta find out what works for you. And we did blow past something, but I don't know if you saw it because we didn't put it up here. But from Diaz James. You know,
Yep.
This is probably one of the best things you could ever hear from. He posted up. He said you were a great CO. That's got to make you feel good a little bit.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, it feels good when you like, especially down the road when you're like, yeah, you're an asshole, but overall, I give you a thumbs up. So I always like to hear those comments from people I serve with. But let's, we've ran past a couple hours here, so we're getting ready to wind down. But I did want to ask you, you struggled a little bit with your mental struggles here a little bit. Like, what do you think is not being done that needs to be done to help the military and warrior class deal with the suicide epidemic we're seeing now?
Oof. That's a toughie. I think it depends on where you're at. Cause I've, and I'm sure you've heard it too. Like, I know some areas where it seems like there's all kinds of available programs, and that's cool, but a lot of guys are too stubborn or embarrassed or whatever to actually utilize a lot of the stuff. Like, like I went through a period, where shit was pretty rough, and people said to me like, hey, like, even when I'd go to the VA for my annual thing, and they'd be like, hey, we offer like group things. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. For me, I think you have to find out what works for you. So for some people, take advantage of the programs, whether it's, through the VA or through just civilians, whatever. For me, that I wasn't going to do that. Like, I don't care how much you tried to convince me it was helpful. I was not going to go to like a group therapy thing just because I'm whatever. I wouldn't do that, but it probably works for some people. For me, it ended up being, again, I think I just mentioned it, maintaining or regaining ties with the guys that you went through the shit with. Like, not only my guys on social media, but like probably the guy that saved me during that time was probably my first sergeant, from when I was in Afghanistan. I kind of, didn't talk to him for a while, but we always got along great. And then we ended up reaching out, and, now we hang out all the time. Like, he was, best man in my wedding. We're going to 3 concert. No, well, I'm going to 3. He's only going to 2 concerts next month. We go down there. He lives down in Charlotte. So he may not know it, but he kind of saved my ass when I was going through like a dark period. And it was just that simple. It was just reach out, talk, shoot the shit about some of the, hey, remember that one time on that one mission and this happened, and oh, remember that dumbass guy who did this, and so that's kind of been my therapy is talking about it. But I think not like as a formal, like, what do I think should be out there to help? I don't really know, because I haven't really looked. I mean, maybe that's the problem. Like, a lot of the guys don't look to see what's available. I'm too
honest too. Yeah.
I'm too stubborn, and like, I don't want to. I'm an older school kind of guy. Like, I'm not gonna. I don't feel like I don't feel like I would reach out, which is not the answer. Like, that's the wrong answer. Like, you should reach out, but the reality is, a lot of us are independent, strong-willed, strong-minded people, and we're not going to reach out. The easiest thing you can do is reach out to the buddies that went through the same bullshit that you went through, or whatever, or have the same thing going through their head. So I'd say step 1, reach out. Don't become a hermit and not talk to any of the guys that went through this stuff. And then, and then beyond that, if group is your thing, then do that. Obviously, the old solution, which I don't think they're even doing anymore, is medicate, which I've never heard anything good about. I'm sure in some cases medication is required, but for a while there, the word on the street was they were over medicating guys, and it was backfiring, and they were ODing or whatever. So, but reach out, talk to your bros. There's a lot of organizations out there that is their focus, or if not their primary focus, it's one of their things that they bring up and they touch base about. So there's resources out there, but you got to use them. And if you don't use them, like I didn't, at least reach out to your buddies. And we do little reunions and stuff on occasion. Like September, I'm going down to Houston with the guys that I was in Iraq with. Like I said, me and Tim hang out all the time. He comes up here, I go down there. I got buddies, through Facebook, but I've reconnected with guys that I was in 8th Marines with, and even further back, I was in Naples with. They came last year, and we went to an OSU, went to a Buckeyes game. Hadn't seen some of them in 33 years or something like that. So,
yeah.
So I would say, yeah, people need to have, a different life outside of the military and have that different identity outside of the military, but 100% don't lose the connection, because it helps. It helped me. It's helped a lot of guys. Some of the guys have reached out to me and that were struggling. And it makes me very proud and humbled and whatever, that they feel like I haven't been their boss in however many years. And the fact that they can reach out to me and still talk to me. I think that's pretty awesome. So I think it helps me as much as it helps them to talk about stuff. So
yeah, good advice. I mean, I think when you're saying that, one thing that's saying to me is, I never accomplished anything. I could say, I made it through schools, or whatever, but I didn't accomplish anything by myself in my military career. That's not what the organization's about. Right. So when it comes time to when we get out and we're struggling, we're not feeling well, it ain't gonna fucking work doing it by yourself. Right. So reach out, and the big thing is, in that case is we're all feeling the same way. Mm-hmm. It's just, we're looking for somebody to talk to. And sometimes it takes that person to start the conversation. So, I've made that a point of mine is if I feel like reaching out to somebody, I reach out, if they don't respond to me, they don't respond to me. But I don't think that hasn't been the case very often. When you reach out to someone, yep, you'd be amazed at how quickly they can do that. I think so. Yeah, those organizations are out there, those brutal honesty to say you don't know, because me too, for a long time, I buried my head in the sand and was like, fuck that, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing that. But I found something to work for me. Yep. They're out there. Just keep looking, right? Yep. And remember, you're not alone, and just start the conversation, and you'll find out that, wow, yeah, wow, you feel the same way I do. Wow, okay, I don't feel isolated, I don't feel alone, I don't feel like the world's collapsing on me. But
yep, for sure.
Awesome. So great conversation. Anything else you want to add that we missed?
No, you guys are probably hearing me talk by now.
No, I love those. Are great. Yeah, not at all. Maybe we get time to talk about the special chicken, but we'll talk after that. But I do want to thank you. A couple of things. Thank you for coming in on short notice. I want to thank Sean for setting it up. I'd hoping it was going to be a little bit later, but it actually happened pretty quick. So thank you for being flexible. Thank you for your 27-year career. The United States Marine Corps and the U.S. Army. Glad you finally figured it out towards the end. I did try to figure out how to put a Marine Corps flag up there for you too, but it's you'll be okay with the Army one, I'm sure. So again, thank you for your service. I know it's been a long lot of sacrifices, and I really appreciate it.
Certainly.
Thanks for coming in.
You're quite welcome.
All right. So tonight we'll move into the part of the podcast that doesn't get easy, and I still don't like doing it, but it's super necessary. Tonight, we're going to honor a service member who took their life. Tonight, we're going to honor U.S. Marine Corps Staff Sergeant Tyler James Fox, 29. Tyler was born on February 15th, 1988 in Winamac, Indiana. Tyler took his life on December 23rd, 2017 in Maryville, Indiana. After graduating from Winamac High School in 2007, Tyler enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. After completing Marine Corps recruit training, Tyler was assigned to Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay, Georgia. Tyler later served in the 1st Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment in Camp Pendleton, California, where he deployed to Helmand Province, Afghanistan. After graduating from the Scout Sniper course in 2012, Tyler deployed with the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit and the Marine Rotational Force. Tyler was an amazing man with an infectious laugh and was always the life of the party. Tyler was an avid runner, enjoyed participating in marathons. He enjoyed home brewing with his dad and his brother-in-law, and had aspired to one day open his own brewery. Tyler's greatest joy in life was his 2 sons and his family. Tyler was a loving husband, father, son, brother, uncle, grandson, and nephew, and will be deeply missed by his family, friends, and comrades. Tyler is survived by his wife, Kayla, sons Wyatt and Hudson, parents Timothy and Patricia, sisters Jennifer and Taryn, brother Evan, maternal grandparents Clement and Beverly, in-laws Willie and Noni, and numerous other relatives and friends. And please, if someone or you may be considering suicide, please contact the Veterans Crisis Line at 988, or you can dial 1-800-273-8255 and press 1, or you can text 838-255 or chat online at veteranscrisisline.net/chat. So again, I'd like to thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Since I didn't have the flag, I had to give you a Marine quote to end it out.
Okay.
So end with
hopefully it's
a Marine quote. I mean,
hopefully it's small words.
It is. It doesn't have pictures. I can read it, so it doesn't have to be small words.
Okay.
But this is by Edwin N. Conger. To our Marines fell the most difficult and dangerous portion of the defense by reason of our proximity to the great city wall and the main city gate. The Marines acquitted themselves nobly. So, again, I can't make fun of you too much about being a Marine, but I thought couldn't put the flag up, but thought I'd honor your service in the Marine Corps. Thank you again. Thank you everybody for listening tonight. Just one more. We got a couple of shout outs. I think we have June 21st. There's still some tickets left for our friends at the Stock Hands. They're having a bourbon event. If you haven't got your tickets, it's going to be a real cool event. Get out there. The VIP tasting is going to be pretty cool. But if you can't swing that, check out the normal tasting tickets. Like I said, we got a few more days. I don't think they're filled up yet. If they do, I can let you guys know. And then schedule's filling up pretty fast here. We're trying to get through the end of the year, so got some openings here to get us into September. Hopefully we get Sean. I think Sean's filled up November 13th, so at least 3 openings. But please, if you want to be on the podcast, we don't bite. We feed you pretty well. Although I didn't let Tim know that we're going to feed him, so he ate before. Plenty of drink, plenty of spirits, and we really want to share your story. So please contact us. And if somebody you think would be a good guest, let me know. I don't have a problem with harassing them and getting them on here as well. So thank you everybody for listening tonight. Thank you again for coming on and for your service. And we will see everyone in a couple weeks. Have a great night, everyone.